Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, and good night, depending on where you are and when you're listening to this. So, today we're going to go on a deep dive and an in depth discussion about the life, crimes, and mind of Jimmy Savile, Britain's Epstein. Probably the worst predator and most prolific predator in all of British history, and we're going to find out who he was, what motivated him, and what and try to piece together what was inside of his mind. So it'll be a disturbing and difficult journey, but it's an important one to have nonetheless, because we need to understand how Jimmy Savile was able to do what he did and get away with it, so that we don't let others in positions of power get away with abuses. Hey Jay, I will be listening from the bushes, literally doing yard work. Oh, thanks, Steve girl. Glad you could make it, and I hope you enjoy the show that we've got for you and everybody today. While you're doing your yard work, it's not the lightest subject in the world, but I hope you enjoy it. You know, it's going to be dark, but there's things to be learned from it, I think. So let's get into it. Jimmy Savile. He was born Halloween, 1926, in Burley, inner city Leeds in England. Leeds is a fairly big city in the UK, a very industrial city, and he grew up there and was born there in 1926. On Halloween night, he was born. So anyone who's into that, you know, I guess that's a sign that uh, he wasn't going to turn out great. And he was the seventh child, so he was from a very big Catholic family, and he claimed that he was a not again child. So when his mother would tell the neighbours that she was pregnant, they go, "Oh, not again." And his mother was 40 when she had him, and he was an unexpected pregnancy. And he said that as a result of that, he was ignored quite a lot as a child, and was you know, because he was the youngest of seven, and you know, he wasn't really able to get enough the attention he wanted. He said that, however, his brothers and sisters kind of contradicted him. They said in interviews, like, Jimmy uh, was a very ill and sickly child, and mother, um basically Agnes Monica Kelly, or Agnes Monica Savile, who was his mother, who he called the Duchess for some fucking weird reason. I don't know why. Um, we'll get on to like his weird relationship with her, but basically he was ill when he was really young, and his mother sent for the doctor to come around to the house, because back in those days doctors would do house calls a lot more frequently than they do today. And the doctor came around and said, "Look, Jimmy's very ill. Uh, I'm just going to write a death certificate for you, and I'll come round in the morning and sign it if he's dead in the morning." But Jimmy's mother, the Duchess, who he called the Duchess, you know, she went out and prayed. She's a very religious woman, so she prayed for Jimmy Savile to get better, and he made a recovery. And as a result of that, the Duchess, his mother, thought that he was this miracle child and a miracle baby, that he'd been able to survive that, and so everybody doted over him. So him saying, "Oh, I was a not again child. I didn't, you know, get attention." That's absolute bullshit. Maybe he felt that he didn't get enough attention, but you know, his brothers and sisters have said, "Look, mother worshipped him, treated him very well. We all were very nice to him, and we all gave him a lot of attention." So him saying that he was like neglected in his childhood is absolute bullshit. You know what I mean? Like, he was one of seven. You know what I mean? Like you're not going to be, you're never going to really have that level of closeness to your parents if you're one of seven. You know what I mean? You're all gonna be a little, you know, left out. But like, For people to say that that's why he went back, I don't think so at all. Many people feel like they didn't get enough attention as kids and they don't go and do what he did. Hi, Amy Boston. Glad you could join us. Our friend in Massachusetts, friend of the channel, Amy Boston. Everyone should go and check her out and check out her channel. She's got a good true crime channel. She's very real, very down to earth. Says it how she sees it, and there's no bullshit with her. As there generally isn't with people from Massachusetts. You know, they're very usually quite straight talking people, and that's something we appreciate here. And we like her coverage of Karen Reid and John Benet Ramsey and all the other cases that Amy's investigated. She does a very good job, and she really gets out there in the real world and gets boots on the ground when it comes to true crime cases that she's passionate about. And you've gotta give her props for that, because a lot of people talk the talk on YouTube but don't ever actually get in the shit, so to speak, when it comes to true crime cases. Amy was getting the for Karen Reid and the court appearances. She really was boots on the ground in the shit. So props to her for that. Uh, so yeah, Savile left school at 14 to work in an office. He was said to be fairly decent at school. He could read and write fairly well. But he went to what was known in the UK at the time as an elementary school, but it was most commonly known to as a poor person's school. So, like, people from a working class background would go there, and they go there till about 14, and then they go and leave for work, and they'd be taught the basic reading, writing, arithmetic, and not a lot else. So that was his schooling, and he left at 14 to go work in an office, and then aged 18 during the Second World War, Savile was conscripted to go down the mines. So basically, you had your draft, and anyone whose draft number ended in a certain number, I think it was 8. I could be wrong. We're to be drafted down the mines and go and work down the mines instead of joining the military, because obviously Britain needed people to, still work the mines, to keep the country powered through coal. So Savile was sent down the mines instead of being sent to war, which he could have been lucky to for that to happen. He may have died in the Second World War, and that would have been better for the world if Savile had died in the war, but it wasn't to be. He was badly injured by a shot firer's explosion whilst working in the mine. So basically, Savile was in a part of the mine where he should have had his light on his helmet, but he had his helmet off, so they couldn't see. So he was in this part of the mine, and they thought it was empty, but he was in it. And then they piled in the explosive charges, and the shot firer fired a shot at them to ignite it, and then it caused the tunnel to cave in, and then it caved in on Jimmy Savile whilst he was in it, and he ended up in the hospital, Leeds General Infirmary, for a good few months, and had to wear a steel jacket corset, to make his spinal bone recover, because he was actually worried at this point, and the doctors were worried that he would never actually walk again. So this caught his interest in spinal injuries and the needs of that, and he had also previously been involved in charity work from being a young kid, because his parents used to volunteer at the old folks home close to their house, and Savile would always go around and befriend the residents and sneak them in bottles of booze and things like that. So, like, he always had a connection with charity, and this will be important to mention later, which he would use his charity connections to actually abuse people, mainly kids. And after he'd finished, recovering from his coal mining explosion, uh, he began work as a scrap metal dealer with his father Vince, and Vince was also a bookmaker's clerk. So would write out bets for people, and this was back in the days when gambling was generally illegal in the UK. So Vince was, breaking the law, but they kind of had to make decent money, because the Savile family lived in Consort Terrace in a very large house, obviously, because there was 7 kids, and Vince and Agnes, his parents. So they needed a big house, and obviously to afford the food for all those people, you needed to really go above and beyond. And all credit to to his mother, the fact that she was able to keep them all together. You know what I mean? And despite the heavy strain on the family, it seems like the Duchess, his mother, was very much the rock of the family, and was the one who was kind of holding it all together. In 1947, Savile claimed to have been the first person to use twin turntables and a microphone. However, this was a lie. People had been doing that since the early 1930s, but Savile was probably the first person to really popularize it in a mass sense, and that he would do what we would describe as club nights now, or performed as a DJ, something that we like wasn't really done then. Back in those days, you would go to a dance hall and watch a band, or listen to a band and dance to a band playing. Like they'd have the house band at all the dance halls, and dance hall culture is very popular at this point in the UK and the US. That's where you go to meet a girl, or if you're a woman, go meet a guy. It was at dance halls, like that's where you'd court, that's where you'd meet your partner. If you danced well, and you connected on the dance floor, like that was a good sign for a good match. And Savile started going to these dance halls, and instead of there being a band, there was Jimmy, and Jimmy would play records from his twin turntables, and people would dance to it, and people would enjoy it just as much as they would a band. So he could tell he was on a winner with that one, and he was making a lot of money through minimal effort. You know what I mean? He'd already done time working in the coal mine, so he knew what hard work was, and he was just happy to be making a lot more money doing a lot less work, as most people would be. So he was climbing the world and climbing the social ladder at this point. And then in 1951, he participated in the Tour of Britain bike race, and obviously I forgot to mention, or didn't mention earlier, Savile was an avid cyclist and had been since his youth. He I think he only learned to drive later in life, so I think most of his commuting at this time was done via bike. He got a job running the Mecca Locarno dance halls, where he would, do his DJing performances in Leeds and in Essex, where he, where he would DJ. As I said, this is where his abuse, like, formally started. He mentions in an interview that during the Second World War, or just after the Second World War, he used to do this thing called lend a hand with the land, where younger people could go and like work on farms and to earn extra money and food or whatever. And in an interview, he talks about like dashing behind the haystacks with girls and women on these occasions. But as you'll see with Jimmy Savile, he would often coach or speak about his sexual abuses in a way as if they were consensual encounters in interviews. He'd do that a lot, so it's very likely that his first sex offences happened just after the Second World War, so in like 1946. So, like, probably just after his injury, but just before he became a DJ and a scrap metal dealer. Like he was for a time working on lend a hand with the land. So it's very likely that his abuses started there. But the media seems to portray it as, and the official records seem to portray it as, it started when he started managing the dance halls. And at this point, he was going for, I'd say, older teenagers, so below the age of consent and possibly on the age of consent. But with Savile, it was never like with other stars or other DJs where it was statutory rape, where the girls were, blown away by the stardom and were okay with stars like David Bowie, Keith Richards, and Bill Wyman, uh, guys like that from the '60s. Being with them. But it was still wrong, and it's still disgusting. And even if a 14, 15, 16-year-old girl's going, "Oh yeah, I want to," any normal man should say, "No, that's fucked up. You're a child." You know what I mean? Like that's weird. But these guys didn't. But Savile, wasn't like them. He would always have to use kind of coercion, threats, intimidation, manipulation. It was always a grooming process with Savile. It was always like that, and uh, there was never any kind of attempts at romantic grooming. Savile was a very cold person. He would just be on the dance hall on the dance halls and spinning records, and then he'd see a girl that he liked the look of, and he'd ask his minder and one of his hangers on to bring her back to his dressing room after the show, and there he'd force himself on him. So there was never any kind of romantic kind of type grooming or anything like that. He was very straight to business and had basically no emotions. He would say often, like regarding his emotions, like I don't have any. And to be honest with you, I don't think he did, or if he did, he was very good at hiding them. They never really came out to the surface very often. And he started wrestling as well, and this was in the 50s, and this was done initially. He was asked to do a charity bout and as a referee, but he said, I won't referee, I'll actually fight. So he started fighting as a gimmick, you know what I mean? He got his ass handed to him most of the time because none of these wrestlers wanted to go home and say that they'd been beaten by a longer disc jockey, you know what I mean? So he basically lost near enough all of his bouts, got his ass handed to him, broken teeth, broken bones, whatever. But he said he loved it and he enjoyed the spotlight being on him. It's another arena where he can gain attention and play off gimmicks and be outlandish. Something that he really enjoyed doing. And it also obviously gave him access to young girls as well. So, when young girls back in those days would really go and watch wrestling. Wrestling was very popular in Britain. It's not like the WWE now back in those days. It was very different, you know what I mean? Less glitz and glamour and more like serious broken bones. It was a lot more hardcore back in those days. Real serious injuries, and it wasn't really staged either. It was fairly real, which was I would imagine would be more entertaining than like the WWE where it's all scripted and it's all rehearsed. Like you never know what's going to happen when it's unplanned. And neither do the wrestlers, which makes it entertaining. And it was after this and his time running the Mecca in Leeds and Essex that he also got offered a job in Salford, and he went there with sidekick Ray Terrett and Terrett, and he lived in the Black Pad, which was a house that Savile had bought really cheaply, by the way, and was falling apart. And he called it the Black Pad, and it was called the Black Pad because basically Savile painted the place black to try and hide all the grime and the mold and the just kind of the rundown nature of the whole place. So he painted all the walls black, and it gave it this really ominous look to it. And this is where Terrett and he would live in Salford. And it was during this time that Savile was still running the Essex and Leeds Mecca, because living in Salford, it is a pretty good position to be if you're moving from one end of the country to the other. He was very close to Leeds in Salford, but very close to a main road, so wasn't that far away from Essex either. You know what I mean? Because through the motorways, he could have gone from Salford to Essex a lot quicker than he could from Leeds to Essex. So he was in living in quite a decent position, and it was also around this time he had interests in and shares in several nightclubs, including one called Three Coins, which is on Fountain Street in Manchester. And this is a club where the Beatles performed prior to their fame, or when they were still basically unknown. And this is when Savile met the Beatles for the first time, and they were paid, I think, £10 or £5 each, which was quite a bit of money back in them days. But obviously, for the Beatles, it was back in their early days, so they weren't big. But that started kind of a long relationship between Jimmy Savile and the Beatles, and a lot of these groups that were coming out in the early '60s and acts he knew very well because of his connections in the dance halls and the nightclub scene. The Stones, the Who, Led Zeppelin. A lot of these groups were very, very close to him. The Rolling Stones, Beatles, Cliff Richard, Tom Jones. So many acts were very much close to Jimmy Savile, and their early years were very much dominated by Jimmy Savile. The Beatles, the surviving Beatles, try to play down their connection with him. I can understand why. They're probably pretty ashamed and embarrassed by it. But Savile was an early champion of the Beatles, and sorry, I'm just lighting my joint. And Savile was an early supporter and encourager of the Beatles, and helped support them in their early life and career. He introduced them on stage in the movie A Ferry Across the Mersey. Jimmy Savile is in that, so it's like he is very much tied in with their life, and he would introduce them on stage. He actually was on the plane with all the Beatles when they went to America for the first time. No, not the first time, but one of the last times when they were touring in the mid-'60s. And John Lennon went up to Savile and said, "All right, King Solomon, what are we doing wrong?" Which was quite a thing to say at the time, because obviously the Beatles were the biggest in the world. So John Lennon went like, "What are we doing wrong, King Solomon?" And he called Savile King Solomon because obviously King Solomon had 1,000 wives, and Savile would refer to himself as being various different people throughout his life, and King Solomon would be one of them. He said he always wanted to have 1,000 wives instead of just one of them, and in a weird way, he saw all of his abuse victims as being sort of his wife. And we'll get into that later, where he seems to think that he's married to these people in a really bizarre sense. So yeah, John Lennon called him King Solomon and was like, "Well, what we doing wrong?" And then Savile was like, "John, you're traveling halfway across the world for managers, for agents and promoters. What are you doing for yourselves?" And that got them thinking. And from then on, the Beatles never toured again. It's believed that Savile's kind of advice to John is what ultimately led them to not touring again. John never really liked touring, but Paul really liked touring, and George wasn't too keen on it, and neither was Ringo. So that kind of arguably started the end of the Beatles, because I think once they stopped touring together, they all kind of moved away, and they, that they were never that close as a group again since past the mid 60s, and that's what ultimately led to their breaking up, as I think, and obviously Yoko Ono as well. But I think Savile's advice in saying don't tour anymore like Elvis was certainly one. And Elvis is another figure that Savile became very close to. Savile also broke up the Beatles. Essentially, yes, like I really do think that, Nasty Meal. I think the second you stop touring as a band, it's over. You know what I mean? Like good chemistry in the studio is created by good live chemistry, and it's very easy in the studio, if you're not performing together, to just get really fed up of each other. And obviously, I say this as a musician, as someone who works in studios and producing and recording and doing my own stuff as well as other people's. I've seen it in so many acts that don't tour as much as they should, where you can see the tension between them, and they just don't play together as well as a group. You know what I mean? And especially certain types of acts like rock acts, punk acts, metal acts, you need to play live to really strengthen yourselves as performers, as artists. It's worse than him being a nod. It's certainly up there. He's in the bad things he's done. I think telling the Beatles never to tour again is certainly it's certainly up there. I'm not gonna lie, because who knows? Maybe they'd have carried on a lot longer, and maybe Lennon wouldn't have been shot. You know what I mean? And you never know. But I really do. I think that him telling them to stop touring was certainly a big impact, and he was close with Elvis as well. When he was, I'll get onto this now. He after the dance hall success, he got the attention of a Decca Records guy from Decca Records, and Decca are obviously a very well-known and respected record label from the UK. And the record label guy saw him and was like, right, he's a good guy who can speak to the youth and who can identify talent. So what we're going to do is we're going to put him on one of our own radio programs, which we own. They owned Radio Luxembourg. Like it wasn't, the show was never done in Luxembourg, but the generators, the transmitters were parked in Luxembourg because it was cheaper for them to have it there than it was in Britain. So like, as a result of that, when Savile was doing his show and other people on Luxembourg, the sound wasn't great because obviously it was coming from transmitters all the way in Luxembourg, you know what I mean, which is in Central Europe. So the sound wasn't amazing, but Savile did get 6 million weekly listeners, so he was doing well, and that's like Howard Stern at his peak type listeners, you know what I mean? Like those kinds of numbers. 6 million per show, basically. He was doing, and he was doing shows a lot less than someone like Howard Stern was doing. So Savile was very big, and you've got to remember this was at a time when there basically was only BBC Radio and then the pirate stations and the other stations like Luxembourg. Luxembourg was kind of a pirate station because the transmitters were parked in Luxembourg. They didn't have to follow the UK's kind of, broadcasting code, so they could play rock and roll on the air, before the BBC would or could, or any other like mainstream UK radio. So that's why it was popular. It was popular amongst the teenagers because they were playing the Beatles, they were playing Elvis, they were playing the Stones, they were playing bands that they wanted to hear, that young people wanted to hear, not fucking Glenn Miller Band, which I like the Glenn Miller Band. But you've got to kind of move on musically, and evolve. Like music can't just stop at 1940. You know what I mean? It's got to keep going and keep evolving. But yeah, Savile found fame in that, and through that, he was asked to give an award to Elvis for a gold record that He'd won, so he was sent to Las Vegas to go and meet Elvis. And whilst in Vegas, he got to understand more about the mafia life, which he had had a taste of in his youth, because his dad being like working for gangsters, being a bookmaker's clerk, running numbers essentially, and also him being in the scrap metal business, and it also him having like gangsters as the door staff, the bouncers on his nightclubs. So he always had a close relationship with organized crime, and he would use these gangsters as well to like threaten families of his abuse victims and his abuse victims themselves into not saying anything. So he knew how to use villains very well, and whilst he was there, he met Elvis, he met the Colonel, and the Colonel actually said to him that he's basically said to him, "You're very good at being evil. You know, you're very good at bullshitting people, Jimmy. You can say one thing and do another. That takes skill. You know, and to have that said by someone like Tom Colonel Parker, you know what I mean? It's who was the king of bullshitting Elvis and manipulating Elvis. You know, says a lot that even he would exactly game recognizes game. And yeah, Savile, would as well. It would occasionally appear in America. You know, in years after that, but he never got any kind of fame in America, because he never did anything in America. To compare his fame at his peak to somebody in America, he was very much like Dick Clark mixed with Johnny Carson. That was his level of fame, and that was his level of fame and outreach. Basically, he was huge. In his peak. He was the UK's biggest celebrity, and no one could really come close to his level of fame. And then in 1965, he appeared in the music video movie called Pop Gear. So, like, back in those days, like, music videos weren't really a thing. So they did this thing called Pop Gear, which was a movie, and they'd have various like hit artists of the year. So the Animals were in this, and the video that everybody knows, House of the Rising Sun, where they're in that studio and it's like the yellow background kind of. That's part of the movie Pop Gear. That's a rip from the movie Pop Gear. And Savile, if you watch the movie, Savile introduces all the acts. He introduces that video of House of the Rising Sun, and says, "This is another one that shocked all of us in the business." And then he Animals, House of the Rising Sun, and then he introduces them, and he did that with several other artists. Interesting. I had never researched him before. Yeah, he's a guy who lived about 1,000 lives. He really did a lot, and he was really, really evil at the same time. He really was good at manipulating people, probably better than anyone I've ever seen. He really cared about his perception, about how he was seen by people. So he knew how to be eccentric. He knew how to kiss ass, and from like witness accounts that people I've spoken to, that several members of my family had met Jimmy Savile. And in various instances, my aunt and uncle, my dad's cousin and her husband met him on a cruise, and my uncle, my dad's brother, actually interviewed Jimmy Savile back in the 90s. And my uncle said that Savile was basically a kiss ass to everybody, and was always trying to set the perception of you liking him, you know what I mean, and you seeing what he wanted you to see in him. And he had the connections of, like, basically, like, he's the UK's Epstein. He had these connections, and we'll get onto it later, when he really gets into the establishment and forms these connections with powerful people that makes him basically untouchable. So his life is the life of 20th is the story of 20th century Britain, but with a really dark and sinister undertone that people really don't want to go into too much. I don't want to jump ahead, but was he a sociopath or a psychopath? I would say he was a psychopath, a sadistic psychopath with a liking for children, is how he was described by someone who worked at Broadmoor Mental Hospital, where he used to volunteer. One of the actual doctors said, you know, even back then, like I suspected that he was a psychopath with a serious perversion for children, and the guy was right. Did he experience abuse as a kid, or is he born like a psycho? I think he was abused as a kid. I don't know exactly who by, but he mentions stuff in his autobiography that would suggest that. He said, like, during the war, when he was underage, like, all the men were away, so like he'd get with, like, at like 13, 12, he'd get with like fully grown women, so that probably had something to do with it. But I think, based on the fact he was abusing boys as well, I tend to believe that a man abused him in some way as well, because, you know, I'm not sure where that comes from. You know what I mean? Like with the younger girls, I can see, you know, he was a dirty bastard, and he mainly went for females. But the fact that he did also go for boys as well, to me, suggests that he was abused by a man as well somewhere. I don't think it was his dad, Vince, because he described Vince as being honest and skint, which means poor, which is the opposite of Jimmy. Jimmy was like dishonest and rich. So I don't think Vince was an abuser. I think maybe a priest. You know, he was a devout Catholic. He went to a lot of. He went to church a lot, so maybe a teacher, maybe one of the old people, old men in the old folks' home where he used to volunteer with his parents. Any number of situations. But I tend to believe he was abused by a man, and possibly also by women as well. I really think that's why. And I think that in his attempt to go, that was normal, I can't let myself be a victim, he just decided to kind of like act it out on others. And like initially, for the first 15 years of his abuse, it was only teenage girls that he was targeting. So like 14 to 19 he was targeting for rape. And but like in the late 60s he started doing boys as well, so I don't really know where that came from. Young boys, or he dating them? Oh no, he was abusing young boys. He had relationships with adult men. One in particular, Peter Giaconelli, who was the mayor of Scarborough. You know the song Scarborough Fair. That's where, you know, that's the place it's talking about, Scarborough in England, in Yorkshire. And Peter Giaconelli was the mayor of Yorkshire and was also a paedophile. He was abusing boys throughout the town at his karate school and also at his ice cream shops. So yeah, Savile had something of a homosexual relationship with Giaconelli. It's been speculated, but I personally think that they weren't really doing each other. I think that they were more just partners in crime. You know what I mean? I think they were more friends than lovers. You know what I mean? I don't think that they were having sex with each other. They may have been, but I doubt it. I think Savile generally preferred younger people. You know, he would always say of older women, "You look a bit walnutish." You know what I mean? Which meant that he thought that she was a bit too old. So, you know, he liked the younger people. Once he got bored with girls, he went to boys. Once he got bored with boys, he stepped to the dead bodies. Yeah, I think that, yes, I think that there's a level of, he wanted to be as degenerative and debauched as possible, and I do believe that he had certain views on Kabbalah and Crowleyism that made him like that pushed him to do that. that he believed that do without wilt should be the law of the land, and that the worse something was morally, the more morally reprehensible it was, the more unnatural it was, the better it was. So I really think that Savile was a Crowleyite, or into the Kabbalah. You know what I mean? And that's why he fitted in so well with the elites, because he understood that that's what they were into as well, and that, you know, gave him in with them. I think the dead body stuff is also to do with his occultism. That he enjoyed, you know, being, he saw himself almost as a grim reaper. So he got access to dead bodies by volunteering in hospitals, and he would like take, you know, the bodies down to the mortuary, and he was actually best friends with the lead mortician at Leeds General Infirmary, one of the hospitals where he volunteered at. And because he volunteered and gave like loads of money to these places, he was basically allowed full access, you know, wherever he wanted, and no one would really challenge him. Do you think he was getting it from Lord Mountbatten as well? Yes, I mean, he actually met, I was talking about Pop Gear, which came out in '65, and he met Lord Mountbatten for the first time the year later in 1966, and that was his introduction to the British royal family. And it's said that this was done through mutual charity interests, but, you know, it'd be interesting to know exactly what Mountbatten saw in him that he liked so much, and I would assume it was the paedophilia, because Lord Mountbatten, very you know, cousin to the to the Queen, and you know, very close to the, you know, Charles and all them, to the old Queen anyway. So Mountbatten was a very senior figure in the royal family, and he was a very prolific paedophile and was very close with Jimmy Savile, and eventually got assassinated by the IRA in the late '70s, whilst on his boat in Ireland, which I thought was always thought was a stupid fucking thing to do. Like they wouldn't go for him there, you know. But he went. Sadly, the same didn't happen to Jimmy Savile. You know, it would have saved a lot of people's innocence. And yeah, so in '66, that was his introduction to the royal family officially through his charitable connections, you know, because the royal family are all like patrons of like various charities to give them, you know, a good public image and shit like that. They don't really care about half of these places. I think some of them do, but generally it's all for show. You know what I mean? I think most of them it's for show. And then on New Year's Day 1964, Savile presents Top of the Pops for the first time, which is for Americans was very much like Dick Clark's American Bandstand, where like groups who were in the charts at that point, the music charts, would come on and perform their hit song on Top of the Pops, and Savile would present it on and off again on various occasions from 1964 until its last broadcast in 2006. And Savile was recorded to have committed an offence on the first airing of Top of the Pops in 1964, as well as on the last airing of Top of the Pops in 2006. So that just shows you the span of his crimes. He was doing it in '64 and he was doing it in 2006. In fact, his last recorded offence, when they looked into him and the reports after his death, was in 2009, when he was about 83. You know, he really didn't fucking stop ever. You know, and that's always been something, an aspect of his offences and him, that has always kept me up at night. How he was able to do it in the 2000s and get away with it in the 2000s. And, you know, there were various police investigations into him. The early ones back in the 50s and the 60s, like I said earlier, he would use his gangster bouncer security guys to threaten the families and the victims. But also as well, he'd like target like usually poor working class girls and would know that they were poor, and then like after abusing them would go to the families and be like, look, don't report me to the police, I'll pay you some money. And that's what he did for a lot of it. He would bribe the parents, but also say like, like you wouldn't have been believed anyway, what with all my connections. And like, given the understanding of the hierarchy in Britain at the time, like they probably would have understood that, that like people with power and closeness to the establishment, you're not to criticize them, and that's how, Prince Andrew or former Prince Andrew and many others are able to get away with it, because it's a culture of you don't criticize people in power because it's rude, you know what I mean? And it's not the British thing to do, you know what I mean? Which is why Britain is generally such a nanny state, and why the people there allow for their rights to be trampled on so much, and their civil liberties to be trampled on so much, because it's kind of part of the national character to be submissive to authority, which is something that I've never identified with, and which is why, the only thing English about me is my accent. There's no English in my blood, you know what I mean? And I've got the blood of a Celt, you know what I mean? I've got the blood of a rebel, you know what I mean? So I've never been fooled by that establishment. You know what I mean? I've always seen them for what they are: sick and twisted and perverted, and always associated with people like Jimmy Savile. And it's my view that without his connections with the establishment, he would have been caught and brought to justice. But it was, I think, the government, MI5, the royal family suppressing any kind of police investigation into him, or it coming out really until after his death. Because if he was to have gone on trial, it would have brought the whole fucking system down, because he was that in with so many people. Oh, I completely agree. Diva girl like Hef, I completely agree. He was very much like he was. I think he was born in the same year as Hugh Hefner, so they were basically like the same age and from the same era. And I'm not sure. I always wondered if Savile ever went to the Playboy Mansion. It seemed like the type of place he'd go to. But I don't know if he had that pull with Hefty, you know what I mean? Because he wasn't like a name in America, but he was a name in Britain. So I don't know. He may have done. It's just hard to find out. Like, did he go? But yeah, similar to Hefner in many ways, you know what I mean? But I think Hefner was better at charm than Savile was. Savile's charm or attempts at charm would always come across as creepy and kind of disturbing, whereas Hef would come across that way as well. But I just think Hef had better people kind of coaching him on how to act. Savile would often act just kind of creepy and weird, and that would be the way that people would generally describe him, you know what I mean? And which would be accurate. And then after, like, he'd been doing Top of the Pops for a while, and a few other things. He was doing Top of the Pops, and this traveling show he did called Savile's Travels, where he'd kind of travel across Britain and talk to people like in their everyday life, kind of like, like how Anthony Bourdain would do his shows, where he'd like go somewhere and like experience the culture of the place and meet the people and eat the food. Basically, Savile was doing that, but would like say to people like what kind of stuff do you want us to play on the radio for you? And he'd take requests from the people he'd meet, and he'd go around in an RV all over the country. And it was during this time as well. He was abusing children and women during this show's run. He would have. In fact, he abused one woman and then had her on the show, like right after he'd done it, and she said it was like probably the hardest thing ever, like to keep it together and to not go like what the fuck did you just do to me, you sick bastard? You know what I mean? Like, and I think he got off on treading close. You know what I mean? On taking risks. I think that he sexually uh, got off to risk. I think that risk attached to his offending aroused him more than the actual act itself. I think he got off at being like fucking loose with hiding what he was about. You know what I mean? He'd always make comments about stuff that you can see and go, "What the fuck?" You know, even if you didn't know he was a pedo, in hindsight, you would deduce that he was a pervert of some kind, and it would lead to that. So, you know, was that the guy that he was using? Yes, yes, and he when he was present, another occasion of when he did this, you know, risky behavior was uh, he abused that woman whilst he was doing Savile's travels, but then also on top of the pops, there was a woman in front of him in the audience, and this is crazy. And he abuses her on live TV. You know, there's women in front, so you can't see him physically doing it, but you can see the woman jump up, and she says she's come out and said, you know, he molested me. You know what I mean? He was touching me, and he says in the clip, he's like, "Oh, a fella can get used to all this." You know what I mean? So like, he did it on fucking camera. You know what I mean? And if she'd have, you know, after the show, she said to the cameraman, like what he did, and then he just laughed it off. I'm like, "Oh, that's just Jimmy Savile." You know what I mean? Like, what the fuck do you think? What the fuck am I supposed to do about it? You know, and she didn't say anything about it. But you know, if she had gone to the police and felt able to, yeah, I think they would have covered it up. I don't think they would have actually investigated him. But it just shows you how sure he was of himself that he was able to do that type of thing, where he would able to be stepped so close to the line. You know, you hear most sexual predators, most pedophiles, it's like they're mostly closely guarded secret. They're not going to be hinting about what they're about. You know, if they did that, their lives would be over. You know what I mean? Like, but with him, he didn't give a shit. He was like, oh, you know, making comments like, and then in 1974, he had his show Jim Will Fix It, which is where the abuse really ramped up in the 70s, in the mid to late 70s and the 80s. This is where he was really doing it a lot. And he his first offence against a boy was in 1969, where the boy, an 8-year-old boy, had asked him for his autograph, and Savile sodomized him in a hotel room in Leeds. So, like, yeah, like what, you know, like I don't know where the fuck that came from. You know what I mean? Like, I really think that Savile was himself the victim of some man when he was younger, because, like, to me, like, although you know, like, it doesn't make sense, because if he was just like that, uh, all of his offences would have been against boys, but it's predominantly against girls and women. And it's clear that he preferred girls and women, but for whatever reason, he also felt the need to abuse boys as well. And I think it's because he was abused by a man, and that was his way of, maybe in his mind, taking that power back by, you know, stealing the souls of these young boys. But I also, going back to what I said earlier, it may have fitted in with his Kabbalah kind of Crowleyite occult beliefs, where he thought, you know, like, to do, you know, the most obscene acts possible, and do things that even he probably you know, wasn't really thinking about doing, but pushing himself to be more degenerative, more and more perverted, more and more disturbing, you know. And I think that was part of it. You know what I mean? To just, you know, to just abuse anything and anybody. You know what I mean? Dead or alive. Like, I don't think it really mattered to him at the end of the day. But I think he did prefer young girls and women. But I think at the end of the day, he just enjoyed abusing people because he was a fucking sadist. I think, put it bluntly. I think that's what he was. You know, he was a sadist. He liked seeing pain. He liked inflicting suffering on people. He liked a sense of power.
he was a scumbag, you know what I mean? And he, uh, he didn't get it. He didn't get any kind of justice in this life. You know, he didn't get a comeuppance in this life. And that pisses me off. You know what I mean? We can't let that happen again. We can't let another Jimmy Savile happen again. You know, the police said when they investigated him after he died in the inquiries, they said they expected he may have abused upwards of 1,000. You know what I mean? Of 1,000 people around that. You know what I mean? From the mid 50s to the late 2000s. You know, and that's you're not able to get away with a crime spree from the mid 50s to the late 2000s, especially ones of rape and paedophilia, unless you are protected by the establishment. Britain isn't some third world country that lacks resources and law enforcement. No, he was fucking protected. They all knew about that. Of course, they knew about that. Do you think he could actually hypnotize people? Your presentation makes that sound less plausible, since it sounds like he enjoyed the coercion aspects of the abuse. Yes, he enjoyed. Yes, he enjoyed making his victims feel powerless, and he enjoyed. He was a power tripper, and he was a name dropper. He enjoyed scaring his victims. He enjoyed intimidating people. Even when he wasn't abusing them, he always liked to throw threats around and intimidate people. He was forever doing that. Where anyone challenged him, he'd threaten them. He'd threaten the shit out of them. He'd intimidate them. Like, that's what he would do. He would always do that, and that served him well in being able to get away with his offences. You know, and he he was able to intimidate these kids, you know what I mean, because he had all these connections, and he was an adult, you know what I mean. He was, and they knew that, you know what I mean. They knew how famous and loved he was, you know, and it must have been very intimidating for them. But yeah, in 74 he starts on Jim will Fix It, which was his, most famous show, that was very much beloved by the nation, and I've watched it in just kind of as research, and I thought it was an absolute pile of shit. Because like people would write in and they'd be like, basically the premise of the show was like kids and young people, but sometimes adults as well could write in, and but it was mainly kids. Like they could write in and like say, "Dear Jim, will you fix it for me to, open the bridge, the gates at at Buckingham Palace, or fucking open the Houses of Parliament, or go on a boat on the River Thames, or meet a certain pop group, or meet like who the fuck, like the Osmonds or somebody like that, or Shawaddy Waddy, some group like that, back when it was on, that were popular. Like meet them, you know what I mean, and sing with them, something like that. That was generally what the show was, and it got fairly repetitive. But like, yeah, but this was at a time when there really was only like 3 fucking TV channels in the UK, so he was like the biggest TV star at that point. You know what I mean? He was the most well known, and he was like doing this. Whilst this, he was also like the country's biggest like sex offender as well. So it's like it's crazy that he was able to just brace it out, and like various newspapers, tabloids did look into him, and there were various scandals, but he was always able to brave any kind of storm, and things would eventually get forgotten about or brushed under the carpet. Eventually, you know what I mean, and he kind of his kind of mo was to basically say that take a gamble on me, basically, and also because he had these connections, and he was such a good bringer in of numbers and of people and viewers, that the BBC were able to look the other way, because when he was like originally given that show, there was concern raised by people
about allegations about him to do with young women and young girls and things like that. But because there was a girl at Top of the Pops called Claire McAlpine who was 15 and she used to go down there and dance, and probably gonna risk a libel suit for this, but I don't really care. I don't really care at this point. Uh, she was abused by Jimmy Savile as well as by, I think, Tony Blackburn, who was still alive. So that's why I say I could be sued for saying this. But I think she was also abused by Tony Blackburn as well, who is another DJ and presenter at Top of the Pops. And so yeah, Claire would go in to Top of the Pops and be like a background dancer because you could do that. You know, you could become part of the audience. They'd let people in, and like they really weren't checking like birth certificates. So children, you know, teenagers were getting in, and Savile was taking advantage. You know, he was targeting them, and so was other DJs. You know, it wasn't just him. Like I said, I think it was Tony Blackburn. It was Chris Denning and Dave Lee Travis, you know, various other DJs that were into, you know, not essentially not always just abuse of young girls, but also of abuse of women as well, and boys as well in Chris Denning's case. So like these DJs were all like and presenters of Top of the Pops were all kind of like all working at the BBC, all into abusing young people, and all knew each other very well. You know what I mean? So it seems like they formed what could be called a ring, you know, together. Hi, Irish. Glad you could join us. Glad you could make it. Yeah, it's a pretty dark discussion for this one, and I think that this one will probably be a 2 hour one, maybe, and I'll get close to that, be a longer one than usual, because usually I end at around an hour, but you know, we're only at like about the halfway point of his life and crimes at this point. You know, he's started Jim will fix it. You know, he's really becoming a star at this point. He's already got connections with the royal family. You know, obviously with Mountbatten, and he was getting close with the then Prince Charles and the then Duke of Edinburgh. So he was never that close with the Queen. Like she appreciated him, but she thought he was a bit of a fool. So he always kind of gravitated closer to Charles and to Andrew as well. He was pretty close with Andrew. Prince Andrew appeared on Jim will fix it a few times. A kid like wrote in, wanted to like experience life in the Navy, and then as part of that, they got to visit where Prince Andrew's ship that Prince Andrew was on. So they got to meet Prince Andrew, and Andrew met Savile and all that. And he'd already known Savile because like that's how they got him on. Savile called him up, asked him to do it, and he had that connection with the roles where he was able to just do that. And Savile had already got his OBE in 1971 for services to charity and entertainment. So an OBE is like the like one step down from the knighthood. Like you get an OBE, Order of the British Empire, and then after that award, you get a knighthood if you're good enough. So what Savile is wearing in that medallion type thing in the picture in the corner. I think no, actually no. I think that the medallion he's wearing is to do with him being a member of the Knights of Malta. That's his knight's badge from the Knights of Malta. And that picture is actually of Savile in the corner and of this live stream or video of the thumbnail. Like that picture of Savile was taken in 2009 when he was receiving his award from then Prime Minister Gordon Brown because he was a Bevan boy. Because I mentioned earlier he worked in the mines during World War II. He was conscripted to go in the mines, and Bevan was the guy who was headed the mines at the time and in the government, and basically that's what the nickname for all the men who were sent down the mines was Bevan boys. And that was Savile getting his medal for being a Bevan boy. And the medallion he's got around his neck is, I think, his Knights of Malta, which is like a knighthood for Catholics, basically. So he got knighted from, you know, the British monarchy, but he also got a knighthood from the Vatican as well. And very few people have that dual honor. You know what I mean? That's very rare that someone is also a knight of Malta and also a knight of the realm of the British Empire. I don't think there's anyone else who's had that, to be honest with you. We haven't even got to when Savile took under his wing a young producer by the name of Isolino Pesatuti. Yeah, Shuli's old pal, Isolino, the pedo producer. You know, I wonder if he was a fan of Jimmy Savile's, you know, and inspired by his work. You know, I bet Shuli's grateful Noga didn't take him to Britain and not America, because Savile actually was had ties to Israel, pretty close ties to Israel. He visited Israel several times and was involved in various Jewish charities in the UK. And actually, like, you know, we talk about his fundraising. He funded the hospital in Atenia in Israel. I don't think he ever visited that hospital, but he certainly did take advantage of his connections with Israel and Jewish charities, because he would abuse children in various Jewish children's homes and even old Jewish people in old people's homes. So yeah, he really did it wherever he wanted. But I've heard this speculated in the Jewish Chronicle. I was reading the Jewish Chronicle is a paper in Britain, oldest kind of Jewish kind of ran paper in the world that's still going on, and basically they did an article where they were talking about Savile's connections to Israel and his various dealings with the paper. This was after he died, and they were saying, like, they think that the writer of it, who was Jewish, obviously, because I think most of the people who work there are, as you'd expect, was saying that he thinks that maybe Savile was interested by the fact that Jewish parents, in his words, tend to believe their children, and I think maybe Savile wanted to test that theory out, because, like I said earlier, he liked the risk. He liked maybe being found out, because he didn't really give a shit. So I think that his closeness to those charities was and wanting to abuse, especially in that demographic, because it's a very small demographic in Britain. It's not like America, where, you know, that you've got a lot of Jewish people in places like LA and New York and Florida, but whereas in Britain, you know, it's like, you know, like in my town where I grew up, for example, I think that there was only one Jewish family, you know, as far as I knew, and there's no synagogue. You know, there's Britain's cities have like synagogues, some of them do, but the numbers of Jewish people in the UK has always been very low. And but yeah, I think Savile's, you know, interest in Israel and Judaism was rooted in his, you know, his interest to see if the theory that, you know, Jewish children are always believed by their parents was actually true. I think he wanted to test the waters. You know, he really didn't discriminate, though. He would abuse, you know, anybody of any background. It really didn't matter to him. But I think that certainly was an aspect, and I think reading that in the Jewish Chronicle made me suspect that also. But I think also his Zionism and his love for Israel was rooted as well in his Kabbalism, in his, you know, Crowleyistic beliefs. You know what I mean? I think he really, you know, believed in the Kabbalah and Crowleyism. And Crowleyism is Middle Eastern occultism. You know, it takes a lot from and Kabbalah is as well. It takes a lot from the precursor of the Jewish religion, which was a form of paganism. You know, what, you know, the earlier Jews were trying to get away from. by having their new religion being so socially conservative versus what was going on before then, what the Hebrew people were worshipping and practicing before then. It's quite the contrast. Canaanites, doing like debaucherous sex rituals with children and then sacrificing them. Like that's the type of thing we're talking about. And I think the civilization and most of the people are like, we need to stop this. We need to not be doing this anymore. And I think that's where the Abrahamic faiths had their root in. These people were like, we need to get away from this as much as possible. So, as a result of that, they became really hung up about any kind of sex and really looked down upon nature. So they went completely the other direction, which also is unhealthy in my view. You've got to have a balanced middle road, and I think that both of what that form of paganism, the Canaanites, the Kabbalah, I think that's completely unhinged and unnatural. The same way as I think that the Abrahamic faiths are completely unhinged and unnatural. So that's the kind of a theological discussion and my view on it. But everyone's entitled to their own views. But yes, he had ties to Israel. He visited Israel, and he spoke to members of the Knesset, the Israeli parliament, and encouraged them to invade Egypt and to have a greater Israel. He said to them, "It's your land, you deserve to have it." You know what I mean, type of thing. So he was very good at blowing smoke up people's asses and telling them what they wanted to hear. I think he did genuinely want that because of his Kabbalistic and Eastern occult beliefs, whereas my occult beliefs are rooted in Europe, are rooted in Celtic societies, Viking Nordic societies, and Anglo-Saxon societies. You know what I mean? Like my paganism is completely different to the kind of Middle Eastern crap that Savile and Crowley were into. You know what I mean? All the kind of child abuse and sex perversions. You know what I mean? I reject anything to do with any kind of perversions or things to do with children or anything like that. You know what I mean? I have a very clear view of what is natural and what isn't, and I think that anything that is unnatural should be avoided at all costs, and that we should live balanced lives where we don't harm other people. You know what I mean? Unless it's in self-defense, and it's like that type of life. Whereas with people like that, Crowley, Savile, these types of figures, it's all about causing pain and destruction to people. And if you live a life like that, you'll be a very fucking hollow individual, and you won't have very many emotions or feelings. And it seems like Savile and Crowley and others like them were very much like robots, that they were kind of divorced from ordinary human emotions and were very much people have described it like Savile would have several different personality defaults. He would have the kind of like trying to be the man of the people and feigning interest in ordinary people's lives. When he was trying to make himself look good and look the man of the people, he would have this sleazy side where he would be obsessively making like sexual jokes and innuendos at inappropriate times. And then he had this other side where he was just serious, ultra serious, and like couldn't for the life of himself poke fun at himself, you know what I mean, or have fun poked at him. He had several different kind of personality defaults, and it was kind of a crapshoot as to which one would come out at which given time. I think the one that was closest to who he really was the kind of the perverted kind of dirty old man persona that he had. I think that he during Jim will Fix It, like an episode I watched or a clip from an episode I watched, he says young girls. Two young girls are on there with their mother, and he says, "Oh, how old are you?" To one of the young girls, and she's like 12, and he goes, "Oh, hello, Judge." You know what I mean? Like suggesting like I want to fuck you, basically, is what he's saying, and that and because I want that, I could risk getting in prison. That's what he's saying. That's what he said. He said this on Jim will Fix It, being watched by millions of people, a family show. He was hitting on a 12-year-old child in front of the whole fucking nation, and he felt able to do that. You know what I mean? Like that just says it all about how, Britain was at the time, about how the world fucking was, that he felt comfortable doing that, and no one was like, "Oh, what the fuck?" And the mother didn't go, "You dirty bastard," or something like that. It's like I don't want to think about the world where he was allowed and able to make comments like that. You know what I mean? Like he and there's various other examples of it, and there was one where he was reading a letter on Jim will Fix It that a young boy had sent him, and the young boy said, "Please do not tickle me," or no, "Please do not hug me," or something like that. And Jimmy Savile said to the letter, "Well, I'm not in the habit of hugging and cuddling young boys, but if you've got a sister, you can bring her along." So he'd make comments like that, you know what I mean, and other kind of lewd, kind of suggestive sexual comments, and throughout Jim will Fix It, and this was supposed to be a family kids show, you know what I mean, and it was always with this sleaze, he was always sleazy, and there was God, what the fuck was I gonna say? Yeah, there was oh yeah, sorry. There was when Jim will Fix It was brought back. You believe it? They brought it back in 2006 or seven for Jim will Fix It Strikes Again, as it went off the air in 1994, and after 20 years, and he was doing very well, and but then they decided to give him another go in 2006, and they only did 6 episodes of that, and I suspect they only did such a short run. I mean, he said in an interview around the time he was offered like a full kind of like 40 odd episode series, but I think he only wanted to do 6 because I think eventually, because they were asking back on like people who he'd like helped, do the fix-its for before, and they were like recreating them as well as doing new ones as well. So I think he only did 6 because I suspect he felt eventually we're going to have to ask people who I've raped to come back on, and that might be a little awkward, and they may want to kill me. So like that was probably why they only did 6 of that revival show, which I watched at the time when it was on, and I always got the sense that he was a fucking weirdo even back then. I was pretty young in 2006 and 7. I was a kid, and I was actually kind of in that demo of who that show was targeted at, and I watched an episode or 2 of it, and I just thought it was shit. I was like, because entertainment and TV had changed so much since the 70s, the 80s, and he was a kind of a relic in the 90s, you know what I mean? But he was still like well respected, and obviously a big part of like multiple generations' childhoods, all the way back from the baby boomers in the 60s to the kids of the early 90s, so he really was a figure in several generations' childhoods, which isn't often that someone is, important to, multiple different generations for several different, things. That's when he was on, when Gary Litter was on the show, and they joked that he liked young girls. No one blinked an eye. Exactly, yeah. Him, and that was Jimmy Savile's Yorkshire Speakeasy, that show, that was like a precursor, one of the precursors he did to Jim Will Fix. Like it may have been, I think it was either Jimmy Savile's Yorkshire Speakeasy or it was Clunk Click. Those were like two shows that only lasted a couple of episodes or a short season, and they were canned because they didn't really get the viewership. But like, they knew he was good. They just needed, like, as a good presenter and good at shows, they just needed to find the right thing for him away from just Top of the Pops. And then they eventually came out with Jim Will Fix It. They weren't originally going to give it to him, but he kind of put his name forward and really made a big stink about wanting to get it, so they gave it him. As you can imagine, it was aimed at children, so that's why he wanted to do it. And yeah, Glitter was on Clunk Click with him, and in fact, on that episode of Clunk Click, he had girls with him who who he'd brought from Duncroft Approved School, which is one of the several institutions. So he always used to go to like hospitals, care homes, children's homes, approved schools, private schools, boarding schools, whatever. He'd always be attached to these various institutions, and he'd give money to the owners and help running the place and fundraise for them. And in exchange for that, the owners would turn a blind eye to him committing abuses on the children or the patients or whatever. And Duncroft was one of those places. It was a place run by the Bonabos charity, and Bernardo's charity. Sorry, I pronounced that wrong. Bernardo's charity, and he went there and he befriended the owner of that place, and she basically like would let him go there and bring cigarettes to the girls and take the girls out for card trips in his Rolls Royce, because he'd learned to drive by this point, but he'd take them out in his Rolls Royce, and then in there he'd abuse them, and then he'd be like, if they went along with it, he'd say like, look, I'll put you on my TV show and give you cigarettes and records and stuff like that. So that was part of the grooming process with him. And so on that episode with Gary Glitter on it, on Clunk Click, several of the girls in the audience were from Duncroft, were underage victims of his that he'd promised that he would take them to the show, and he did. And I would assume that and they had already said, or some of them have already said that Gary Glitter abused them as well after they had that conversation. So it really was just all out there in plain sight, and that's what happened right after that conversation ended. They went and did that together. And he consistently defended Gary Glitter in the 2000s when Glitter had already been arrested for child porn charges in '97, after his computer was after he took his computer to PC World, which is an old computer store in Britain, and there they found a bunch of images of kids, and he did a bit of time for it, not nowhere near as long as he should have done. But personally, I think he should have been killed for that. But he did a little bit of time, slap on the wrists, and then he went to Asia and got busted in Vietnam for those types of offences. And Savile, in an interview, said on people like Glitter who get caught with child pornography, is like, he said, and I'm paraphrasing here, he's like, he's not tried to sell them, he's not tried to show them in public or anything like that. It was for his own gratification, and whether that's right or wrong is obviously, it's up to him as a person, to determine that. You know what I mean? So it's this really fucking weird shit. You know what I mean? Like, would you expect that from like? But you see, this interview never aired. They only heard after his fucking death. So a lot of shit and a lot of times where he'd say things like this, it would only come out after his death. You know what I mean? But he'd say enough weird shit that was caught on camera. Like in the 2000s, he was he was being interviewed by a woman in Scotland, because he had a house up there, and his family background was Scottish and Irish as well, I think, on his mother's side. Scottish on his father's. And he basically, yeah, he had a house up in Scotland that he bought in the late 90s. So he spent a lot of his time there in the 2000s, up until his death. And he was being interviewed by this woman, like, about and she asked him, like, what do you get up to when you're in Scotland? And he said, well, I live up in Glencoe, and up there we like to rustle cattle, which means we like to kidnap ladies and sell them. And he just said this, like, not even like smirking or laughing. He said it like stone cold, dead serious. And the woman was like, right, thank you. Like, really freaked out by him, as you could imagine. You know what I mean? Like what the fuck? You know, talking about kidnapping ladies and selling them. You know what I mean? It's some weird shit, some really weird shit. And so, like, he carried on with Top of the Pops and Jim Will Fix It. And then, like, obviously carried on with his royal connections, but also he helped Margaret Thatcher, you know, gain more wider notoriety in and amongst the British public when she was leader of the opposition before she became Prime Minister. She was on Jim Will Fix It, and like, they did one where so some young girls, and I think a young boy as well, went to meet Margaret Thatcher and ask her questions about what it's like to be like the leader of the opposition, and what it's like to be, you know, in Parliament, and all that kind of stuff. So, like, I think he went out of his way to pick that one. Uh, when it was raised, to appease her, because I think he could tell that she was going to get in the next election, and he wanted to kind of have her, you know, think of him highly. You know what I mean? And she did. You know, she went on Jim Will Fix It, and it made her look good. You know, she interacted well with the kids, you know, and she, you know, credits that as help. She credited that as helping her, you know, raise her awareness throughout the country better. And her relationship with him was very, very close. You know, they, I think, for multifaceted purposes, you know, she felt that he was seen to be a supporter of hers, despite the fact that Savile wasn't particularly political, like, he didn't vote. And he had done work with other governments, like Labour governments as well. So he wasn't only just working with Conservatives, and he actually did party political broadcasts for the Conservative Party and the Liberal Party before they became the Liberal Democrats. And so, like, yeah, he did delve into that a little bit, but generally speaking, he tried to remain a non-partisan. But, like, I think Thatcher saw him, she saw that people would see him as being a supporter of hers, and obviously Jimmy Savile being from a working class northern background, you know, Leeds is in the north of England, and obviously, you know, the north of England in those days, not anymore, in those days, would vote for the Labour Party, would be very left-wing, left-leaning, and wouldn't like a Conservative from the south like Margaret Thatcher. So she thought that, and I think the royal family also saw him in this sense, whereas he could be seen as someone who, you know, he's like in close with the royals and Thatcher, and they like him, and that may be a way for them to be liked more by the working class in general, which is the class that he came from. And he was most popular amongst the working class, and the upper class, the middle class, always seemed to view Savile with suspicion. Interesting, that, isn't it? Very interesting. And so yeah, he carried on with Thatcher and was very close with her, and he obviously volunteered at Stoke Mandeville Hospital, and which is a spinal injuries
centre in the UK, and that's actually where the Paralympics started. That's the Paralympics obviously goes alongside with the able-bodied Olympics, and that was originated actually at Stoke Mandeville Hospital. They had a their version of the Olympics, you know what I mean, and they called it the Paralympics, and then like it was officially adopted. Like the organizers of the official Olympics liked it so much that they began incorporating it, as part of their 4 year every 4 year events, you know what I mean. So now and then, ever since then, that's the hospital where that originated from, and it specializes in spinal injuries. And obviously Savile was in a shot firer's explosion down the mountain, so suffered with spinal injuries himself in the mid to late 40s, and so I think had a connection to that, but also could see it was a place where he could abuse and like wean his way in there, you know what I mean? And he would also have that, seemingly legitimate reason of, oh, I had this background, I had this injury, this is why I am so passionate about spinal injuries, because of my own experience, you know what I mean? And he would often justify his charity work as saying, well, look, my parents did it, I did it as a kid and I like doing it. And it's part of being a good Catholic and everything like that. And I enjoy doing it, you know what I mean? But like it was always for his own self-aggrandizement and also for opportunities to abuse. I don't think he gave a shit about anybody there or anyone in those situations. I think he never allowed himself to. He often said in an interview. He actually had an interview with the psychiatrist Anthony Clare, who was like. They had this show in the 90s called In the Psychiatrist's Chair, where Anthony Clare, who was a trained psychiatrist, would speak to celebrities, and try and get inside their head. And Savile, in that interview, it's very eye opening. He says, "I'm a man without emotions. I don't allow myself the luxury of having emotions." He did have emotions, but he tried his best not to show them. You know what I mean? He tried his best to, be cold and basically manufacture a personality so that nobody could see, inside of him, which is just a really, perverted and deranged fucker. You know what I mean? Who had absolutely no fucking shame in him. He would abuse kids in hospice situations. He was abusing kids that were dying. You know what I mean? And kids that were paralyzed and all kinds of shit. You know what I mean? He really had no shame. And we go back to earlier, his kind of my view of him having occult practices of the Middle Eastern variety, of the Crowley variety. The worse it is, the better it is. And I think that all that lends into that. And I think that he liked the idea that he was sucking the life force almost and taking the souls away from the innocence away from all these kids, and he felt that it gave him power in a long life. I genuinely do. I think he was doing it for perverse reasons, but I think a big aggravating factor in that was his belief that by doing that, they would keep him young. And he'd said that to people. Uh, Someone had asked him, like a guy who'd worked on Savile's travels with him actually asked him, like, Savile said to him, "Oh, I had two 15-year-old girls in my trailer this morning," and by had he meant like had sex with them and raped them, statutory rape at least, because of them being under the age of consent. And there's probably force involved because there usually was with him, so it's probably a forcible rape. And he said that to a guy who was working with him, and the guy was like, like, how does that sit with your like Catholic faith? And he was like, oh, I've got a special relationship with the man upstairs, so like he turns a blind eye to some of this stuff so that and then in exchange I raise loads of money for charity. So he genuinely believed that all the money he was raising for charity kind of offsetted all the bad shit he was doing, which obviously it didn't. You know what I mean? You can, I'm much I'm very sure that those kids and those people would have preferred, you know, a lesser funded hospital over them being fucking raped. You know what I mean? Like, physical injuries, you know, can often, you know, heal and go away, but psychological injuries can often be much harder to deal with. So, you know, like those things, the things he said, and then also, like someone said to him about him seeing him with girls, they were like, "Oh, they're a bit young for you, aren't they, Jimmy?" And he said, "Oh, when you think like that, you're finished." You know, and he said, "Oh, they keep me young." You know what I mean? They keep me alive. You know, and I genuinely believe he thought that he was like almost like psychically, vampirically draining the souls out of these children, and by doing so, it was giving him a longer life. I genuinely think he believed that. As fucked up as it sounds, I think he believed that. And I think a lot of people like Epstein and others believe in that type of thing too. A lot of these child abusers and rapists, they think they're shit. You know, it's really out there, but people think it. You know, it's really crazy. But also, as well as him, like, and I mentioned about Stoke Mandeville Spinal Injury Centre. So he was doing a lot of fundraising and charity work for them, and he would obviously commit lots of abuses there of men, women, girls, various people at various times. But it was while at Stoke Mandeville that he was invited to Chequers, which is the Prime Minister's like residence, like uh, vacation type residence place in the country. It's in Stoke. It's not too far. Well, it's not in Stoke. It's close to Stoke, so it's close to where the hospital was. So like every Christmas when Margaret Thatcher was Prime Minister, so for like 11 Christmases, Jimmy Savile would be at Stoke Mandeville usually for the Christmas time, volunteering and stuff. And he was invited along with other Stoke Mandeville staff, but mainly him, to spend time at Chequers, the Prime Minister's residence at Christmas with her family. So he was there for 11 years, you know, and the Thatcher family have debated that, but of course they would. Of course they'd debate it. Of course they'd want to say he wasn't there as many times as he was. Fact of the matter is, he was very close to Maggie. He was very close to Thatcher, closer to Thatcher than he was any other prime minister. And he, but also during this time in the late 70s and to the mid 80s, like he was getting like a lot closer with the royal family. So like he was very close with Charles at this point, and he was acting as a marriage counselor stroke advisor for her, Charles and Princess Diana, which is, you know, laughable that a man who described marriage as brain damage could be a marriage counselor. You know what I mean? I really don't understand what the fuck these people in the royal family were thinking, having him be. No wonder the marriage fell apart. No wonder they got fucking divorced with Jimmy Savile as the marriage counselor. I mean, what the hell was he gonna do? And it's said that like whilst he was at the palace, he would always run his like he would kiss like various women's fingers and then run his tongue up their arms, and he'd do this like in front of people without shame. And he did it to Diana and to Sarah Ferguson as well, Andrew's ex-wife. Diana really didn't like it, but Sarah Ferguson didn't seem to mind, as you could probably expect, with her reputation. And he basically, yeah, he got closer with them. He was their marriage counselor, and he also had Charles and Diana come when he opened a new wing of Stoke Mandeville and a new ward of Stoke Mandeville, which he'd helped fundraise like about 9.5 million for it. And then he got Margaret Thatcher and the Conservative government to give 500,000 of taxpayers' money, but he raised, you know, the 9.5 million himself with
various friends who are big financial backers, you know what I mean, and various other things. And like during this point, Thatcher was very much pro austerity, so saying that the government didn't want to be funding hospitals and public services as much because of the bad financial state the country was in. So she was very much keen on people like Jimmy Savile fulfilling the role of the government in funding these institutions, which he did. And like I think that like as well, we talk about him being a bridge to working class support for Margaret Thatcher. He also provided that service for her as well. He was fundraising for hospitals and for places that otherwise her government would be forced to spend money on, which they didn't want to do. So she was very grateful for him for that as well. And she felt greatly indebted to him, and that's exactly where he wanted her. So she tried many times during her prime minister ship to get him a knighthood. So prime ministers can write letters of recommendation to the honours committee about people to get knighthoods, and he was passed off on it many times. You know what I mean? Because members of the honours committee, and in fact members of Thatcher's advisors, said, "Look, he's trouble." You know what I mean? He boasts about his exploits with young girls in his books. He talks about beating people up in the nightclubs in the 60s and having people locked in boiler rooms. He's a fucking shifty one and he's dodgy. We will look bad if shit comes out about him, and we're the ones who've given him the knighthood. You know what I mean? So like that was why he was knocked back so much. But eventually in 1990, he got the knighthood, and he said in 1990 that it got him off the hook. You know what I mean? And I think by him saying that, it means that he by as a result of that, he was a much safer from prosecution than he would have been otherwise. That Sir title, really comes with a lot of weight, so he felt almost invincible at this point. He had the Sir title, he was a knight of the realm. He also had the papal knighthood, the knight, then he was a knight of Malta. And when the Pope came to visit Britain in the 80s for his tour, and this is the first time a Pope had, I think, ever even been to Britain, and Savile was the person who was actually, the guy who was showing him around all of Yorkshire, and spent a lot of time with the Pope and spoke with him fairly intimately, and that led to him getting the papal knighthood in the late 80s as well. So he's in with the two biggest institutions in Europe, I suppose, the royal family in Britain and the Vatican in Rome. He's he's got power. He's got friends in all places. You know what I mean? And he really did. And it was also during this time, like obviously, I said he opened the wing at Stoke Mandeville and had Charles and Diana come with him, and that shows you how close he was to power. And he was always attending royal functions and at Buckingham Palace, and he'd like do the London Marathon, and then after he'd finished, he'd run right into Buckingham Palace in his running outfit wouldn't even change, covered in sweat, and he'd have a cup of tea in there with Prince Charles and with the Duke of Edinburgh and people like that. So that just shows you like the level of access, and people who were with him when he went to the palace, like important people would remark that Savile was the only person they ever saw that was just waved in. He never had to go for any kind of security checks. He was just waved right in, and that shows you how close he was. And like they make a big deal out of all that though. But like as we've discovered with Prince Andrew, if the royals like you and say, look, don't subject him to the whole, rigmarole and scrutiny of coming in here. He's one of our mates. Let him in. Because Prince Andrew was getting his escorts and his child prostitutes to come into Buckingham Palace under you know, without going through the checks. You know what I mean? Because obviously they were in the country illegally, and they were also being trafficked. So obviously he didn't want their names being written down. And it was the same with Savile. You know, the royals like, no, we don't let Jimmy, you know, have to go through all the security process. And yeah, he was the marriage counselor and advisor for Charles and Diana. He advised the royal family on charity and on health, matters of like the healthcare industry in Britain. And also, he was also considered to be the godfather of Charles's sons. So, like William and Harry. So he wasn't in the end. I think the Queen may have talked him out of that. But yeah, he was considering that. And yeah, him and Charles were very close. And on Jimmy Savile's 80th birthday, he was given a box of Cuban cigars and golden cufflinks, sorry, by Charles, and a note that said, "No one will ever know what you did for this country, Jimmy." And you've got to ask yourself, what did he do for the country? Because everything that he was known for, everybody knew the charity work, Jim will fix it, all that shit. Everybody knew, and he was very much known for. But the stuff that people didn't know, what was all that about? You know what I mean? And my view of it is that he was procuring children for these elites, and he was also basically for the intelligence agencies, like Epstein was doing, blackmailing people who they needed blackmailing, and entrapping people they needed entrapping in these situations. And in exchange for that, the security services and the police would turn a blind eye to and cover up his offending. So situations with maybe certain pop stars that they wanted to control, certain politicians they wanted to control. Savile could, be used to, entrap them in a certain situation, get them with an underage girl or boy or something like that. And Savile could be used as a catalyst to do that. So like these are my suspicions, because I'm going to be real, you don't get in the orbit of the royal family without being heavily scrutinized by the security forces, by MI5 and the government and various other institutions and places. You don't just get to walk on in there. You have to go through security clearances and everything like that. So they would have known of his past offending, because he had been, interviewed by the police, but they always got dropped because of he'd either lack of evidence or he'd pay off the family. And so like these allegations about him were known. It was known, and it was suspected about him. There were rumors, always rumors about him, and people knew him, but they were never really heard in the press because of his that Britain's really strict libel laws, his connections with the establishment, and also his legal threats, and also his blackmail of other people within the media, and also the feeling that the establishment really wanted to protect him because he was doing these favors for them, and obviously the mainstream media is very much part of the establishment, so they're not going to go at one of their own, are they? And that's why he got away with it, and he got away with it for so long because he was very good at what he did, as bad as that is. And he yeah, he after and then obviously we're getting on to his career moving on, and we're getting into the 90s. But also another institution he was heavily linked to and was involved with was Broadmoor Mental Hospital, and that's like an asylum for the criminally insane. And sorry, it's a place where the Yorkshire Ripper Peter Sutcliffe was sent, and who we talked about in a live previously to this. And Savile obviously had the Yorkshire Ripper connection. One of the Yorkshire Ripper's victims was found at Roundhay Park in Leeds, which is just, Savile lived at one of his houses. Well, one of his apartments, his penthouse, was at Roundhay Park. And right, she was discovered right close to where he lived, and he was a suspect in that. And the police even went so far as having a cast made of his teeth, because the woman had bite marks on her breasts, and they wanted to make sure it wasn't Jimmy Savile, because so many people said this guy's fucking odd. It's right near his house. He's known to frequent prostitutes. He was known by Leeds' Vice Squad because he frequented prostitutes, and like he was being watched by them, and but his teeth didn't match the breast, but the bite mark on the breast. But Savile, in his he had a girlfriend called Sue Hims, like on again, off again, from like starting in the 60s, but they kind of reconnected in I think the 90s and the 2000s, and like she was basically his girlfriend, but he was still obviously like abusing and also seeing other women and maybe men as well. But he said to her, actually, when they were on a drive going through Yorkshire, he said one of the Yorkshire Ripper's victims was found here, and actually people used to say that he didn't work alone, hinting that he was involved, basically, which wouldn't surprise me. And then he was volunteering at Broadmoor, spending a lot of time there, and he was very close with Peter Sutcliffe, the Yorkshire Ripper, when he was there, and he was always spending time talking with him and very close with him. And Sutcliffe would defend Jimmy Savile after Jimmy Savile's death, and all the stuff came out about Jimmy Savile, and Sutcliffe said, it's all a load of rubbish, and that Jimmy Savile was a really nice man. And obviously Peter Sutcliffe says that it has to be true, Guy was a fucking nutcase, a head, a total head case. And Savile was as well, which is why they liked each other so much. They were both sadists, they were both sexual sadists, both freaks. But Jimmy Savile always used to have this remark, which is actually pretty interesting. And I've mentioned this on the live about Peter Sutcliffe, where he'd say, "Oh, women are brain damage, and marriage is brain damage. Brain damage." You know what I mean? Like that suggesting like being hit in the head, and the victims of the Yorkshire Ripper were always hit in the head with a hammer. You know what I mean? And when Jimmy Savile made that comment when he was being interviewed by Louis Theroux in 2000 for a documentary called When Louis Met Jimmy, and Jimmy was standing on his balcony looking over Roundhay Park, actually at where that body was found when he said this. And then he turned to Louis Theroux and went, "Oh, women are all brain damage. They're brain damage." And what I think that meant was, obviously he was alluding to the killings of the Yorkshire Ripper and suggesting he may have been involved in some of them, but also that he has a habit, or had a habit, of self snitching to women to impress them. A lot of people, a lot of male criminals do that of any type of crimes. You know what I mean? Like bravado comes in, and then that you want to impress this woman. You're like, "Oh, do you know what I did? You know what I mean? Or do you know what I might have done?" You know what I mean? It's like it's and because he's always about wanting to be seen as powerful and dangerous and intimidating, uh like, despite, which is obviously bizarre, despite the fact of what he was supposed to be, a fucking DJ, kids TV show presenter, charity fundraiser. You know what I mean? Like the idea that he'd need to have this kind of sinisterism to him is really fucking bizarre, and obviously a sign of his dark side. But no one was able to put two and two together like that, I don't think. And or if they were, they didn't have the balls to actually do anything about it. He could never have gotten away with it in this time, because camera phones and stuff, and he would have been caught out. Hi Amber, glad you could join us. Yeah, it's we're getting to the end, but this has been a lot longer than the usual one, because this guy's life was so long. I know so much about him. Unfortunately, I wish I didn't. But I always saw it as a case that was important to investigate, because like we have to know how we can prevent people like him ever getting away with what he got away with for so long. Like it's just the same with Epstein and Weinstein and all the others. We have to shine a light on what they did in the dark, so that people can't get away with this type of thing. And so we know how people like him were able to manipulate and get in with people in power, and how this exposes the fact that in our society, that people with power and closeness to power, there's a set of rules for them, and then there's a set of rules for the rest of us. And I think now more than ever, people are realizing that, recognizing that, and demanding that it change. And that's the purpose of doing this. It's not about trying to make it as salacious or as disturbing as possible. You know what I mean? I'm not really going into too much like graphic details of the things he did, because no one really wants to hear that. Like I'll give a vague outline of it, but like we all kind of know what he was doing. I don't need to fucking spell it out for you all in graphic detail. I think that would just be unnecessary. But understanding how he got away with it, and the methods he used to get away with it, and how we can learn from that, and prevent people from using those same methods again, is important. I think education is key to preventing this sort of thing from happening. But glad you could join us, Amber. I'm very happy that you could make it. So he was, like I said, very close with the Yorkshire Ripper in Broadmoor, in the mental hospital where he was a patron of and volunteering at, and was given basically full access to. He had this like role of being like honorary entertainment officer, but like he just like occasionally would have bands or artists come and perform at the mental hospital. In fact, he even got Princess Diana to visit Broadmoor at one point, obviously, because people know she liked to visit people, like people with AIDS, and people that were really like ignored by society. So like she'd go to Broadmoor and visit like the mentally ill, and they really liked it when she would go there. Obviously, everyone loved Diana. Very nice woman, and who married into a very evil family. But she went there, and he would obviously take advantage of his position there, and would abuse many. Like he would never abuse. It's odd, no, because like we mentioned, like he abused boys as well, but like when he would abuse boys, it was usually in Jim will fix it, or in hospitals. But like when he would abuse girls or young women, it was everywhere or anywhere. He was very like specific about where he'd abuse boys and when he'd abuse boys, but it was very he would do it to boys, but it was never with the same kind of frequency as it was with girls. He was a lot more likely to do it to girls, but like he did have connections to certain places like boys private schools and things like that, and other places, but like he would go to those places a lot less than he would. And the statistics are like he would only occasionally abuse boys, but like at Broadmoor, it was always girls or young women uh, who were there, and he had access to um, their them in the shower. Like he'd go and watch them when they were in the shower. He'd go and stand there with staff and watch them when they were taking showers. Like what the fuck, you know what I mean? Like this guy, like just
this DJ just gets to just fucking turn up because he gives money to the place and watch the patients, the female patients in the shower, get his kicks, you know what I mean, and also abuse them in the rooms. Can you imagine, like, you're someone who's like, you're a woman, you're a young woman or a young girl in Broadmoor Mental Hospital, you've got mental illness, or you may have been abused or something like that, and you go in there and you think you're going to get help, and it's even worse than what you're coming from. There's a paedophile, sex pest, rapist who's given free reign of the place, and all the staff are just as fucked up as he is. And yeah, what a terrible place! What an awful place! And I feel terrible for all those women, and all of his victims, male, female, dead or alive. Because he abused the dead as well. He was a necrophile. His depravity knew no bounds, and that was very much part of his, Kabbalah kind of Eastern occult practices, and it's depravity. It's depravity that I've never seen or I would never want to see, but I've never seen in terms of research and frequency of it. You know what I mean? Like, he really didn't discriminate in what he did and who he did it to. Everybody was a target. But he did have, I think, a preferred group, young women, young girls who were, from a low income or a vulnerable background, were his favorites, or ones with like physical or mental disabilities, which is horrible to even say, but that was his preferred group, as per the statistics on his offending. And then eventually he was made the head of Broadmoor on an interim basis, despite having no formal qualifications of any kind. Like I mentioned earlier, he left school at 14, and he was given charge by Edwina Curry, the Minister for Health at the time, in the Margaret Thatcher government. He was made head of Broadmoor, of a task force that was running Broadmoor whilst the old leadership were in a pay dispute with the government. Like, the lunatics really were in charge of the asylum, and that's what a lot of the doctors were saying at the time, that the lunatics had taken over the asylum. Because a lot of them, like one of them was interviewed in a documentary, about Savile years later, and he said, like I knew he was a paedophile because and all the paedophile patients knew he was a paedophile. They all gravitated towards him. He gravitated towards them. He was always associating with the paedophiles in Broadmoor. You know what I mean? And well, what the fuck does that say? You know what I mean? Like, birds of a feather flock together. You know what I mean? And you are people you gravitate toward say a lot about you. So, in the fact that it was the paedophile patients and the murderers that he was, the most, and also the vulnerable young women and girls that he was the most drawn to, says it all. You know what I mean? He wasn't talking to like a middle-aged bloke who was there because he was bipolar or something like that. He was talking to either vulnerable girls and vulnerable women, or really fucking sadistic fucking monsters who were who they were probably sharing tips with, and things like that, and patting each other on the back and discussing their perverse sexual exploits. As disturbing as that is, and the fact that he was given the keys to the place and was running it for a time on an interim basis, as government appointed by the government. This is a DJ, this is a fucking DJ and a TV presenter running at what was at the time the biggest mental hospital in all the country. So and this was in the 1980s. So like, what the fuck? You know what I mean? Like, this is another aspect of his story that is so unbelievable. There's so many layers of unbelievability to it, and I think he really prided himself on the fact that a lot of the stuff about him was very hard to believe, and I think that he used that to his own advantage.
and I really do. And I I think that then he was carrying on his charity work and his involvement in Broadmoor, but then also he was still doing Jim will Fix It and Top of the Pops until Jim will Fix It ended in 1994, and from then he kind of went into kind of less public appearances. He was getting older as well. In 94, he would have been, approaching, I think approaching 70, yeah, in 94. Yeah, he was around, he would have been approaching, yeah, in 94, he would have been about 68. Yeah, so yeah, he was approaching 70 by the time Jim will Fix It ended. And apparently he was very pissed off that they pulled the plug on him. And after 19 seasons, he wanted to do a 20th, but they said no. But by then, his clout was waning. You know what I mean? His star power was waning. He was on the decline. But he was still very popular with the royals. He was still, going and being seen at places and still obviously making media appearances, but like fewer. And was occasionally, doing Top of the Pops as well, but very rarely. And was doing, sorry, just smoking a joint whilst I do this because it is quite an intense topic. But yeah, he was doing Top of the Pops as well, like semi sporadically at this point. But he was doing radio. He went back to radio, which is where it all started for him, and he was doing that as well. But and all during this time, he was continuing his abuses at various places, like wherever he was, really, and also like at the various hospitals and charities that he was affiliated with. He liked ones that were local, you know what I mean, and that didn't have the infrastructure maybe to or the ability, the financial backing to refuse him or to put restrictions on him. Like one, for example, was a charity that he backed, which was like the taxi drivers of Manchester would take like kids with like special needs, learning difficulties and disabilities to Blackpool Pleasure Beach for the day, which was like a theme park, kind of like Coney Island in the UK. Very much Coney Island inspired, but they got some really good rides and it's not rusting apart. It's still going today. Blackpool Pleasure Beach is a very good day out for the family, I think, still. And but yeah, he used to back this charity of taxi drivers that would drive and take these kids to Blackpool for the day for free. And the pleasure beach as well, like liking this good publicity, would let the kids in for free. So they were getting the journey there from the taxi drivers for free and also letting in for free. So Savile used to back this and would also go with them a lot to the pleasure beach. And in fact, on one occasion in the 2000s, he was there at the same time I was there, but I never saw him. Thank fuck. You know what I mean? Because I was a kid at that time. But I was very streetwise, and I didn't know who the fuck he was basically, because Jim will Fix It had been off the air. Vaguely knew who he was because it was in reruns on certain channels, but like not like he wasn't like a name to me. You know what I mean? But he would go there, and like that's an example of a situation where he probably was offending in those years after Jim will Fix It ended, and like that's an example of the type of charities he would affiliate himself with, small local ones that like really needed the money that he was providing them, and probably wouldn't have the balls to challenge him on anything. And like the taxi drivers in Manchester type thing was an example of that. And it's just so heartbreaking that he was targeting, not just children, but disabled children and children that were in hospice care as well. And as if their lives weren't difficult enough already, he goes and fucking does that. And or with this bizarre fucked up notion that because he gives money to fucking charity, it's okay. That's not to take aim at Catholicism too much, but that has been an element of Catholicism for some time, where people who are Catholic or profess to be have been able to kind of buy their sins away. So I think maybe that part of his character is rooted in that, and his view that he could basically buy his way out of anything, and really messed up. But yeah, he had that documentary with Louis Theroux in 2000, where he admitted all kinds of weird things. He admitted to tying people up when he was running nightclubs in the 60s in Manchester. He admitted, to being like a judge, jury, and executioner. You know what I mean? He also said that he would tell people that he hated children so that people didn't accuse him of being a paedophile, which is crazy. That he just openly admitted saying that, which is, Louis Theroux said in the documentary, if anything, that's more suspicious that you'd say that. And he goes, well, hard luck, that's just my policy, and he was very bizarre in the documentary, and also it goes into his relationship with his mother, who I mentioned at the start, who he would call the Duchess for some fucking weird reason. I don't know why. He never really elaborated on that, and basically, uh, he like kept her clothes, and she died in like 1971. And this documentary was going on in 2000, so he kept all of her clothes and he got them washed all the time, and her bedroom was kept in like at his home was kept in like pristine kind of condition, and he'd refer to all of the dresses as being like artifacts, and he'd say like when he'd come into the apartment or the penthouse, he'd say things like, all right darling, when he would walk past her door even though she was dead, and things like that, and just things like that. And he had a very bizarre relationship with her. And apparently, when she died, and he admitted this, when she died, she was laying in state in his sister's home in Leeds. And Savile spent 5 days, the 5 days, basically most of them sat in the room with his mother's corpse alone. And obviously, we know Savile was a necrophiliac, so it's possible that he had sex with his own mother's corpse. As fucked up as that is, that's got to be the most fucked up thing I've ever said on this channel. I hope I don't have to say anything as fucked up as that again, frankly. But you never know. Humans really like to shock me with the lengths of their depravity and brutality. So I like to be an optimist, but it's difficult when you follow the fucking news and you read stories of how messed up people can actually be. I'd like to think that I'm never going to have to report on a case as messed up as this, but I probably will. That's the sad reality of it. But we need to do our best to try and ensure that an offender on Savile's scale, talking like possibly thousands of victims, isn't able to do it on that scale again without getting caught. And that's the aim of what we're doing here, raising awareness of that. And so yeah, like as I said in 2006, 7, 6, 7, we've got to have some balance. I mean, we can't be too serious. This is a serious topic, but we've got to have some levity. Jesus Christ, you know what I mean? It's too much darkness for me. I like a bit of light as well. God, you need a bit of light in amongst the darkness. So yeah, 6, 7. Yeah, around 2006 to 2007, Jim Will Fix It had like a revival for those 6 episodes where they recreated stuff that they'd done before, and they did new fix-its, and there were kids on that actually. But I've looked into it and I haven't seen any reports that he offended against any of the ones that were on the revival of Jim'll Fix It, but I wouldn't be surprised if he did. But you know, I'd love to hear from someone who actually worked on that, because that revival show, because it's much easier to find someone who worked on that than someone who worked on the original Jim'll Fix It, because there were probably most of them are dead, because it's fucking old, you know what I mean? And they were old when they started it, and it's he acted bizarre in the revival of it. The revival episodes that he did in 2006, like he was full of sexual innuendo, and he had like guest presenters to come on who would like introduce the fix-its that they were doing, and he was like, whenever it was a female, he was always flirting with them, and whenever it was a man, he'd be like, oh, you're better looking than me, you'll have to go, I'll have to get rid of you, and it's all that kind of shit. And he was dressed like inappropriately as well, like he'd always wear like shell suits and or like these weird vests that were like had holes in them so you could see his like man tits basically, and it was just fucking weird. He'd dress weird, he'd act weird, and he'd be very sexual with the female guests, presenters that were on, and generally awkward with the kids. And I wouldn't be surprised if the production on that would just said like, keep the kids fucking away from him, whatever you do. You know what I mean? Don't let him near them. You know what I mean? Because he will try. It was an open secret about what he was like. And it's interesting that the revival happened on UK TV Gold and not on the BBC, which is what Jim'll Fix It was on originally. I think the BBC didn't want to embarrass themselves more than they already were going to when it all came out about him. By not giving him another show. You know what I mean? It was another network, but. I've not heard any reports that he actually abused anyone on that, but he may have done. He may have done. I wouldn't put it past him. He did it basically anywhere, and even though he was 80 at that point, he's still offended in that year. We have documented offences that he committed in 2006, and we go on to the last episode of Top of the Pops. He presented the first in 1964, New Year's Day, which we mentioned earlier, and then he presented the very last Top of the Pops in 2006, and he was accused of committing an offence on the very first Top of the Pops. Sorry, and he was accused of committing an offence on the very last Top of the Pops in 2006, and on this event, when he was aged 80, it said that he basically groped and tried to pin a 13-year-old girl who was a member of the audience against a wall, and had to be grabbed and pushed away from her by two other male presenters, and that basically he was able to skate free from that. You know what I mean? The girl didn't want to relive the events, at the time, or make a big deal out of it, and was intimidated by his celebrity, so didn't pursue charges. But I'm shocked that he, did it, so openly in the 2000s as well. In the 70s, it was another thing. People were sadly a lot less likely to challenge somebody like him doing something like that, whereas in the 2000s it was a little different. More people were likely to call him out on it, which they did. Obviously, he was pushed away from it, but he didn't get any kind of criminal prosecution, which he should have done, of course, because you'd expect that. And he was also investigated in 2008-9. Several different investigations. One was linked to allegations of abuse linked to Duncroft, where the children, the girls, reform school type thing, kind of girls' home type of thing, where he abused girls from there, and some of them in their adult life came forward to the police in 2007 and 8. and he was investigated about that, and he was interviewed under caution by the police in 2008, by Surrey police, in his office in Stoke Mandeville Hospital, not at a police station, which says a lot about the level of power he had. And he also used his chauffeur at the time, who was actually a serving police officer, a guy by the name of Mick Starkey. He was serving in South Yorkshire Police at the time, to be his go-between between the forces down south, who were investigating him, and him personally up north. So like him using a serving police officer to kind of bridge the gap of communication was showing them that he had, friends in high places, and that they weren't to fuck around with him, and that he could, set the parameters of where the interview would be, like not in a police station, in his office in a hospital that he helped fund, to further emphasize, the good that he's done. It's all very, very well planned, and that shows you how manipulative he really was. And he was interviewed there, and he was asked about allegations that, that he'd forced oral sex on girls, forced them to perform it on him, should I say, and other kind of fucked up things that he did, and rape as well, and other allegations. And then he just said it was all not true, and that he wouldn't have been able to get away with such a thing in that type of place anyway, and that he wouldn't want to even if he could, and that he'd never done anything wrong in all of his life, never brought any harm to anybody, and that this is just women after a few quid from him, and that he's always the victim of blackmail attempts because of his fame and his status and his notoriety, and that he's got close contacts with the police, like Mick Starkey, like the guy he used to bridge the gap of communication, and to say, look, I give them to the police all the time, and we laugh about them. You know what I mean? But these were genuine letters that you'd get from people who had abused him. Who hadn't abused him, who he'd abused. And they were saying, like, not demanding money, but like threatening him, saying like, I'm gonna fucking ruin you. You know what I mean? Because they were still obviously in turmoil and very bitter about what he'd done. You know what I mean? So they wanted to probably vent some of that frustration and scare him a little. But he'd try and frame it as these are blackmail attempts, or that they were going to lead to blackmail attempts, And the police officers, and then he said to the two police women who were interviewing him that, if they didn't like rein it in with the questioning, that he would have them up in the Old Bailey, and that also that he would have absolutely no fear in taking them to court, having the female accusers face him in the Old Bailey in the Crown Court, and him having the best lawyers in the country, him having Queen's Counsel lawyers, the best lawyers in the country, highest paid lawyers, highest paid barristers, because he was a sir, he was a knight, you got to remember that. And he would have been able to get that with his money and with his connections. He would have had made the police women look bad on the stand, made the victims look bad on the stand, and that was his way of saying, look, this is what will happen. And then the police had to tell that to his victims, and that obviously got them nervous and intimidated already, and then the Crown Prosecution Service, which is who determines whether a charge will be pursued, or someone will be charged with an offence, determined that there wasn't enough evidence on Jimmy Savile to prosecute, despite the fact that there was two different investigations going on at the same time regarding child sex abuse about him in different parts of the UK. There was the one in Surrey, done by Surrey police, investigating his offences at the Duncroft girls' school/home, and also at his offences on the island of Jersey. Like New Jersey, Old Jersey, that's Old Jersey. And he would go on to the island of Jersey where there was a children's home called Haute de la Garenne. And he would abuse children there. That was another institution that he was close with. And he actually would this is some deep shit now. It's been rumored that Savile and former Conservative Prime Minister Edward Heath, who also was an alleged paedophile with a liking of young boys exclusively, unlike Savile, who only occasionally abused young boys but mainly abused young girls. Ted Heath abused only boys, and it's alleged that Savile and Ted Heath would abuse. Heath would abuse boys, Savile both boys and girls on boats in Jersey, which is an island in between England and France, which England owns, sort of, and basically. They'd take these boat trips out, and Savile and Heath would abuse kids, and then they'd kill them, allegedly, and then they'd throw them into the sea because they couldn't. Ted Heath, obviously, who was the prime minister or a former prime minister, depending on when this happened, couldn't allow such people to exist. Who had such dirt on him, so they'd kill him, and Heath would have the power to have those murders covered up. So that this is where another rumors and allegations and suggestions that Savile may have also been involved in murder of children as well. And I think if you can rape a child, you can certainly kill a child. I think it's basically the same thing. You know what I mean? I really don't think that that's a leap at all that he would be able to do that. I really don't think that at all. So at this point in the 2000s, Savile was being investigated for not that specifically, obviously, because that would only come out much later. The suggestions he may have been killing children as well as abusing them with Ted Heath on boats in Jersey. But he was investigated for just ordinary molestation accusations in regards to the children's home, Hope de la Garenne, which was being investigated by the police at that point. So the fact that there were two different investigations going on about him at the time, but the Crown Prosecution Service, who is supposed to be determining whether there is enough evidence to charge someone, and there are multiple, victims in different parts of the country saying the same thing, but they still didn't think that there was enough to charge him, says it all. It wasn't that there wasn't enough. There was more than enough to charge him. There was more than enough to take him to court in 2008. But they didn't do it because he was, like I said, he's protected. He was protected by the establishment because of his closeness with the royal family, his procuring kids for the elites. He was protected by MI5, and MI5 were the ones who were behind this cover up of Jimmy Savile because they knew it would make the establishment look terrible if he was unmasked, and he would also probably name names of other people because he'd said this in his books. He said in his own autobiography, for fuck's sake, in writing that he when he was in Manchester, there was a runaway girl who'd run away from a care home, and he was, he had her in his house, and she was spending the night with him, and that's what he said, and he framed it as if he was just being a good Samaritan, which is fucking bullshit. And then he said that a female policewoman, well, obviously a female police officer, should I say, came to him in the morning looking for her, and then when she found the girl there, and she went and took her and suggested maybe pressing charges against Jimmy Savile. Savile said, "Listen, if I'm to go, I'll bring the whole station down with me," because like that's him saying, "Look, like, I have dirt on you all and on everybody. Fuck with me, and I'll start talking and naming names, and you don't want that." So I think that the establishment also knew that if he was caught, he knew a lot and would be able to talk and name some and say some really dark shit to deflect from his own shit, and to punish people for not protecting him in his mind. So like it's very much an Epstein situation where he probably would have been bumped off and killed in the cells, in order to keep his mouth shut. I really do think that if he had have actually have been charged in 2008 and gone to court, but then again, there's a good chance he probably would have gotten away with it. You know what I mean? Like in a jury trial, I think he would have been able to. His lawyers would have been good enough to accuse to say these are extortion attempts. And but with a good prosecution lawyers, they'd be able to say, look, these are different people from different parts of the country, and I think that the initial, him, it being seen that he's going to court for this shit and actually being charged would have spurned on a lot of his other victims, to actually come forward, and then it would have just snowballed like it actually did when he died, when they finally could see that they were being believed and would be taken seriously and listened to. That everybody came out the woodwork, thousands basically, and over a 50, 60 year period of him committing these abuses. And I think there was a golden opportunity lost in 2008 to actually get justice for his victims, and hold him accountable for everything he did. So he died in 2011. So he would have only spent 3 years in prison. You know what I mean? But like I said, he probably would have been bumped off pretty quickly to shut him up from naming all the names. But the security forces, the royal family, the government, everybody thought wrongly that it was better to just let him die and try and pretend that none of them fucking knew, and hope for the best. But that I think that massively backfired. I think that the allegations of a cover up from the state wouldn't be happening and wouldn't be occurring as much if they'd have actually brought him to trial in 2008. But they didn't. And then ironically, the guy who was head of the Crown Prosecution Service at the time when they decided not to charge Jimmy Savile was Keir Starmer, who's currently the Prime Minister of the UK. So shows you what type of guy he is. He thought he was head of the CPS when he was leading the CPS when the CPS determined that Savile, there wasn't enough evidence to charge Savile, which is, you got to really ask yourself questions about Keir Starmer's judgment and perhaps his own corruption and his own culpability. If he allowed such a thing of something that he was heading to happen, such a blatant miscarriage of justice, where it was clear there was enough evidence to investigate, and nothing was done, and charges were dropped through the claim of lack of evidence, and then like I said. Then after, obviously, back to Savile's life, like after the Jim will fix it revival finished, so from years 2009 to his death in 2011, he did keep a very kind of pretty low profile compared to previous years. Like his media appearances were far fewer, and he he would basically kind of appear more in print media, and would use people in various kind of like the Yorkshire Evening Post, which it was his local paper. He would use journalists from that to give him he would feed them stories about himself, and then they'd run them, just to kind of keep his name out there, because he was as well as everything else, as well as being a pervert, he was a deep narcissist. So he needed his name to be, out there, even when he wasn't. His fame was waning, and a lot of the younger people, born in the mid to late 90s and the 2000s, didn't know who the fuck he was. You know what I mean? And it's that bothered him, I think. You know what I mean? It made it harder for him to offend, I think, and get a kind of a basis of talking to children, or a line to or something to use on to manipulate children. You know what I mean? If they didn't know him, you know, it would be harder for him to say, "Oh, I'm, you know, from Jim will fix it." You know what I mean? Like they didn't know who the fuck that is, and it would be harder for him to groom them and convince them that he's safe. You know, they just see this creepy, you know, long-haired guy smoking a cigar, wearing a tracksuit. You know what I mean? Like they'd be like, "What the fuck is this?" You know what I mean? And I think that's like the natural reaction most people have to him. You know, like just a vile, gross sicko. You know what I mean? And that's like without even knowing what he's about. You know, he looks like a pervert. You know what I mean? He looks like a wrong and dirty old man. He really has that look down. But yeah, he kind of faded away from public eye and would occasionally, you know, be interviewed for different things, you know, to do with mainly nostalgia, to do with the 60s. Like that was, you know, a lot of the time he was interviewed for stuff to do with that. So, and various groups that he, you know, was involved in. He also appeared in Celebrity Big Brother, like briefly, for an episode in 2006 where he wasn't a housemate, but he was kind of in his role as, you know, Jim will fix it. Like he was making, you know, wishes for the housemates come true, and he was very weird in that as well, as he basically was in everything he ever did. And then ultimately he died in 2011, 2 days shy of his birthday, which is Halloween, and he died in his sleep and was found by his cleaner in the morning, and he had been battling pneumonia in hospital the weeks prior to it, and he had actually commented to a friend that like I think the end is now, basically. So you kind of knew he was going pretty soon, and then he died, and then the tributes poured in for him. The then Prince Charles, now King, you know, released a statement saying he was saddened by the news, and at his funeral, you know, there was, you know, a bunch of very famous dignitaries there. There were members of various fraternal organizations that he was a member of. There was loads of celebrities, like I said. He was given a guard of honor. His coffin was carried by the Royal Marine Commandos, because yeah, Jimmy Savile was given like an honorary Royal Marine Commando beret and was basically an honorary member of them. He was the only other people that have gotten those have been the Duke of Edinburgh and Prince Charles. So that shows you like the level of kind of respectability and in he had with the establishment, even the military brass. You know what I mean? He would do like military exercises, like training, like physical training with them on like Dartmoor and things like that for his marathons. Obviously, he was a marathon runner, and I think that they gave him that because he would do that with them and like, you know, entertain them whilst they were doing it and keep them kind of in good spirits. So like he was given a guard of honor by them, so they carried his coffin, and his coffin was gold. It was all gold, you know. It was very gothy, you know what I mean. And he had a parade through the streets of Leeds and through the streets of Scarborough as well. And he was eventually buried at Scarborough Cemetery at a 45-degree angle, so he could, quote, see the sea. And his gold coffin was encased in concrete. He said to stop grave robbers or anything like that. But the fact is, like I think he knew, he left that instruction that his coffin be covered in cement. You think he knew that they were gonna that it was gonna come out about him, and that people would want to fucking, you know, dig him up and like, you know, I don't know, like, like I don't know what they'd want to do, like I don't know, like what they want to do. I guess like like throw his corpse in the fucking in a dirt pit or something, or burn it, or you know, put it on a spit or something, or just kick it around, or I don't know. You know what I mean? But like, I think he knew that people would want to fuck with his grave after he died, and I think he knew that it was going to come out that MI5 weren't going to bother, stopping the media from, running stories about him anymore. And like yeah, but like for the first year after his death and on his death as well, like most, he was like there were masses of tributes paid in the media for him, and loads of people like respected media personalities, musicians, politicians, whatever, like tweeted and put on their Facebooks and tributes to Jimmy Savile. Some of them never deleted them, which is pretty awkward. Liz Truss, who used to be the Prime Minister of the UK for like 2 seconds before she like resigned. She was only Prime Minister for like 70 days or something like that. A very, very short time. And she tweeted back in when he died in 2011, like she'd seen like Jimmy Savile a lot around Leeds, which is where she's from, and she'd seen him in the Flying Pizza, which was a restaurant that Jimmy Savile used to be a frequent customer of, because he never had a cooker, he never had an oven in any of his houses, because he said an oven meant a wife. Which is kind of stupid, because he could have had an oven and just paid a fucking someone to go and cook for him or something, you know what I mean? But yeah, he would always eat at restaurants, and the Flying Pizza was one of his favorites. So Liz Truss tweeted about like seeing him there, like, and then also saying rest in peace to him. And obviously, like, she didn't know that he was a pedo, and most people didn't when he died. The media were like calling him a great charity fundraiser, because he raised millions for charity. He was probably the biggest charity fundraiser in all the UK history, in certainly recent history. But at the same time, he was doing that to give access to children and victims, sorry, and to try and, I think, offset in his mind the terrible stuff that he did. But it was Liz Truss said, rest in peace and all that, but she never deleted the tweet when it came out about him being a pedo. So like people like go and retweet it to make her look like a fucking idiot, because like she never deleted the tweet. Still to this day, and it's kind of funny to see that, and various other celebrities, paid tributes to him. And for a year, kind of his legacy was intact, but people started talking, and there was already an investigation going on to him before he died by the media, by the BBC. Like Marion Jones, whose aunt actually used to run the Duncroft home, which we were talking about earlier, where he would go and he would abuse girls at this approved school, but he'd also take them to the BBC and stuff like that. And Marion Jones became a journalist at the BBC himself in later life, but as a kid he would visit his aunt who used to run Duncroft, and he'd see Jimmy Savile there, and he mentioned about how his parents would used to have a go and confront his aunt about letting Jimmy Savile have all this access and taking the girls out and all that kind of stuff. And she'd just brush it off and say, "Oh, he's a friend of the place," and there's nothing, he's not doing anything wrong, you know what I mean? He's friendly, you know what I mean, and all that kind of crap, to justify it to herself and to them. But yeah, Marion always said that he felt, Salva was a fucking weirdo even as a kid. You could sense that, and it all started with him, doing research, wanting to figure out like what happened at Duncroft, and like why was Savile there, like was he abusing these girls, you know what I mean? Like that was the suggestion he got, and as a journalist he wanted to try and uncover this, and he went online on a now defunct site called Friends Reunited. I think some of you might remember it. The British might remember. Some of you British might remember it. Kind of like a precursor to Facebook. But there was a blog on there from a woman who was at Duncroft, and they were talking about Duncroft, and this is where he found her. And she was talking about a man by the name of JS, who had abused her when she was a teenager, and she'd written this, in like the 2000s, and he saw it, and he suspected that was Jimmy Savile, and then whilst they were doing inquiries into the story, they found out that Jimmy Savile had been investigated by Surrey police back, in 2008, and they were, gathering more stuff, and were had enough stuff to broadcast. And Savile was still alive at this point, but then he died. And you'd think that would make it even easier for them, because he wouldn't be able to sue at that point. But the BBC pulled the plug on the whole show altogether, because, and then instead of having that play, they played a bunch of Christmas tributes to Jimmy Savile instead. They had Shane Ritchie, present a special version of Jim'll Fix It. They ran a lot of Top of the Pops. I think they did a special version of Top of the Pops as well. Both shows had been off air. They kind of brought them back just to kind of honor Jimmy Savile and the year that he died, and yeah, he was laundered by the press, laundered by the media, but like it's believed that they pulled the plug on the investigation into him, exposing him and what he did in Duncroft School, and being investigated by Surrey about it, and then them not pursuing it. It's believed that they hid, the BBC buried that investigation, that documentary, before Savile died, and especially after he died, because they wanted to protect their own image, because he committed some of the abuses at BBC premises, but also they had the planned tributes to Jimmy Savile after he died in 2011. In October, and then obviously Christmas was not far away from that, so they didn't want to have to pull all those tribute programs just for one expose about him possibly being a pedo, and they didn't want to do that, so they covered it up. And then when the program was shelved, the makers of it, Marion Jones and Liz Keynes, went to Channel 4, the rival company in the UK, and they did the documentary with them instead, and that made headlines, and people were very mixed on it as first, to saying like, why didn't you go out when he was alive, which they did come out, and the police didn't fucking take it seriously, you know what I mean, and they dropped the investigation, and didn't press charges, and then it snowballed. 500 people, and then around 1,000 people came out to say that Savile had abused them. So it was so many that they couldn't deny it anymore, and his own family, who had been defending him, eventually had to admit that he was that. His own nephew admitted he was that. He couldn't deny it anymore, and his own niece sadly was abused by him as well, and she'd been like an outcast and alienated from the family because of that, because she spoke out about him and what he did. Some of his family, still defended him, sadly, but the main ones that were kind of speaking to the media to defend him initially retracted, and went back and said, look, he fucking did do this, and and then they're sorry for ever doing it. But one of his nephews actually is not his nephew who retracted, but another nephew was himself arrested and charged for rape of an underage girl in the aftermath of the Savile allegations. And his nephew, that nephew, was one of the family that were defending him and still does, and you can probably see why, because he's just like him. And and as well, Savile's own brother, when Savile was alive, was accused of being inappropriate with a young patient at a place where his brother was volunteering, and that annoyed Savile because it was bringing eyebrows onto bringing attention onto possibly his own criminal offending, and kind of cut off ties to his brother Vince at that point. His brother Vince was named after his dad, Vince Senior, Vincent Savile Senior, and Savile, like, it seems like he liked controlling his siblings. Like, he was the youngest of seven, as I've said, and but because he had the money, the power, the fame, and everything, he liked holding that over them. So would certainly control them through money and through things like that. He like his niece who he abused, he gave her mother, his sister, a lot of money, and got her a house in Cairo in fucking Egypt. You know what I mean? So like she was very much bribed, and her his niece, like when she went to her mother about it, her mother told her to shut up and not be so stupid, and I'll speak to him and I'll sort it out. You know what I mean? And then like it happened again, and like it seemed like she said like I'll speak to him, I'll sort it out, and like she just went to him and he bribed her basically, and that's basically it. You know what I mean? That's her. That was her way of sorting it out. So he came. It seems like his siblings were pretty fucked up as well. So you've just got to wonder where this came from. You know what I mean? And like apparently his dad was a fairly decent fella, and his mother was fairly normal. So I really don't know. Why him and his siblings were so fucked up. But it's more than likely that they were abused, possibly by one of the parents, if not both. You know what I mean? They may have presented a very normal front, but there's no way you've got this much dysfunction amongst siblings without there being, something to do with the parents or someone very close to the family. It's very bizarre, And in terms of like friends, it's very interesting because like obviously like he had the royal family and all these powerful people that were his friends, but like he would who he would spend time with, but like day to day kind of stuff, he had a very close knit kind of group of people, and they were called his Friday morning club. And this was like made up, and this would happen in Leeds, where every Friday morning it would be members of the local police. Sometimes they were in uniform, sometimes they weren't. Local businessmen, local media people, and they just sit in his penthouse in Roundhay Park in Leeds, drinking coffee and like whiskey, whatever, and eating cakes, and just kind of just gossiping basically about the goings on of the town. And it's at these places where he'd show like the cops his like what he would call his nutter letters and his blackmail letters from people who were like genuine victims of his airing their grievances to him. And that was him kind of like getting ahead of the curve almost by framing these as blackmail attempts to the local police whom he was grooming in a way himself, having them come over to his flat and having cups of tea, because he developed that relationship because he'd always had close ties to the police. He had Mick Starkey, who was his chauffeur, who was also a serving police officer at the time and was a member of the Friday Morning Club. And he had various politicians. He had the boxer Frank Bruno, weirder kind of association there, and various other people who would drop in from time to time. And that was his way of, knowing what was going on around Leeds, and also having everybody in power in Leeds in his orbit and, in the palms of his hands, basically. You know what I mean? And he would like show off his celebrity to these people and show his connections to them, like by having Prince Charles at the time, now King, call up when the meeting was going on to say, well, we've just got to have them answer the phone, and then it would be Prince Charles, and they'd be like, oh, fucking hell, it's Prince Charles, show his level of power and, influence almost. It was all about that as well. It was about him flexing his muscles as well, and him, showing how big his dick is, so to speak, about how much power and connections he has. And I think that like he would do similar things like that in other places where he had bases, obviously in London and up in Scotland in Glencoe, where he had a house as well, where he would commit offences. So he bought the little cottage in Glencoe in 1998, very isolated place. I've actually been to his old house that he owned in Glencoe. It's been demolished now, I think, or at least the process of it's been started to demolish it. But I went before it was demolished, and it had been vandalized, obviously, because he used to live there and people graffitied a bunch of shit on it. And I went in just to kind of check out the place because I was in the area anyway. I was going to Glencoe. I was staying in Fort William, which is nearby, the outskirts of Fort William, and I was there to go up Ben Nevis, which is the biggest mountain in the UK, and I was there for that reason. So going past in the car, I thought, fuck it. Going past Jimmy Savile's old house, I was like, fuck it. I'll pull into a lay-by, and I walked up the back way through the stream that he used to, that used to be his, and walked into the house. The windows were smashed. Climbed in through a window and checked out the place. And I'm going to tell you, the walk to get there was very picturesque and very nice, but the second I got in the place, I just felt a really sick feeling, like a really terrible feeling, like a really not a good feeling, like a lot of bad shit's happened there. Like I know it has because he committed 20 offences there from 1998 to 2011 when he died. So like he committed a lot of assaults there in various situations, and he even had Prince Charles there visit him there back in the late 90s when he first bought the place, and he had women that he got from the local hotel. He dressed them in maids' uniforms and got them to kind of serve him and Charles some poached salmon that he had gotten hold of from a local, and Charles went to this little kind of cottage out in the Highlands. It's absolutely, it's not that far from Glencoe, but it's fucking rural. You know what I mean? You're not going to hear a scream out there. It's right near a main road that's fairly busy, but inside there, you know what I mean? Like you're not gonna hear somebody, and I think that was by design. I think he liked that rural ruggedness, you know what I mean? I think he liked the isolation. I think he felt more secure and more able to isolate there. Because a big thing of it, like he had places to live in, obviously Leeds, Scotland, London, and Bournemouth as well. And so he had places to live all over the country. And he was always on the move throughout his life up until the end. So he'd spend time and obviously he had a room at Stoke Mandeville Hospital, and like they gave him a room in hospitals as well that he would give money to and volunteer out so he could stay there overnight, so he could abuse and wander the wards at night as well. So but he was always on the move. He never spent 2 nights generally in the same place, even towards the end. Like he was always on the move, and I think that was to basically if he'd committed an abuse against somebody, like the parents or the boyfriend or whatever come looking for him, and then they can't find him, you know what I mean? Like and he'd also have the ability to kind of maybe say, oh look, I wasn't there at that point, I was here, you know what I mean? And because of him constantly traveling, it would be hard to actually pinpoint exactly where he was at one point and verify it, especially back then, where we don't have they didn't have the same technology that we have now to be able to locate where someone was at a particular point, like with the phone or something like that, or CCTV. They didn't have that back in those days. So I think that was a motivator of why he was constantly on the move and moving around and in RVs and, you know, doing that type of lifestyle when he was like a millionaire. You know what I mean? He was living like a frugal person would, but he was a millionaire. You know, I mean, the only thing he really spent money on was his cars and his like custom made tracksuits and his jewelry. But like everything else, he was pretty frugal with. Like at those Friday morning club meetings, like a lot of the cakes were from like the local co-op, and like you know, like that's like a pretty cheap store to go to and budget friendly store. You know. So yeah, he wasn't like splashing the cash, and he was known as being a bit of a tight bastard. Like even when he was taking his brothers and sisters out for a meal at Harry Ramsden's, which is a fish and chips chain in the UK. He you know he wouldn't even he took them out on a voucher basically. The meals, you know, he'd won free meals from a voucher that he got from running a marathon or from a charity or something like that. And basically, they were all dining out on vouchers that he'd won, and he wasn't paying out of his own pocket, despite being a millionaire, for his own brothers and sisters. So that just shows you how tight he was, you know what I mean, and how miserly he was, even with his own family. But when it came to raising money for other people, he was very dedicated towards that, and it showed you that it wasn't for this altruism, you know what I mean. It was of his it was for his own self-aggrandizement and his own abilities and uh, his own ability to access victims, you know, and to have a kind of cloak and a shield over him to kind of dodge any kind of criticism and go, oh look, I can't be that bad. I raise all this money for charity and all that, so you know you can't be being too critical of me. But like, yeah, towards the end of his life, that access kind of waned. You know, he was kind of not allowed to visit Broadmoor anymore because of concerns over how he would behave and you know how he would act. And then also they didn't like him. You know, he didn't have the access all areas at Stoke Mandeville anymore, and the same at Leeds General Infirmary. So towards the last few years of his life, he wasn't really at these hospitals, these institutions anymore, because the new management and the new protocols had kind of made it that like he just couldn't do what he used to do. That made it so he could abuse. So he was doing it a lot less, but he was still doing it nonetheless in these later years. Whenever he could, basically, and you know, like on train journeys. Like I told you, the last recorded offence of his was in 2009, where it was a 48-year-old woman, I think, who was on a train from London to Leeds, which he was on, and he groped her basically, and he did that at age 83. So like he was really in it till the end. Basically, he was really prolific in his offending. It lasted from the mid 50s to the late 2000s. You know, and I've never seen anyone who was a sex criminal have such a long-lasting crime, you know, campaign of crimes. You know what I mean, and to get away with it pretty much unscathed for so long. You know what I mean, and it only come out after they're dead. You know, and I think it's a sign of how you know the Jeffrey Epstein isn't like one isolated case. There are many guys like him who in history and possibly even still now. You know, not even possibly we know there are, and we've got to shine a light on these people and raise awareness for what they're doing and how the establishments all over the world cover up this type of behavior and use it for their own benefit and their own advantage, and how you know that we can never allow that to happen. And we've got to protect the children and the vulnerable and everybody, and stand up to predators and to sex offenders and perverts wherever and whenever we can. You know, we've got to stamp it out and make sure that nature prevails, and that anything that is unnatural, that is unhealthy for society, is done away with. But thank you everybody for sticking with us for 3 hours. You know, this is the longest live stream I've done in a while, but it's been such a long and complex topic that you know we've had to kind of it's necessitated being this long, you know, to really do it justice. You know, this man lived such a long time and did such things of note, and also, you know, he was also a sex offender. So, you know, it's important to you know, give a full picture of everything that he did and how he did it and the access he got, and why he was able to do what he did. But thank you for everyone for persevering with us for such a difficult subject. And in case I don't see you, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. Thank you very much. Take care. And later this week, upcoming live, sorry, will be, I'm thinking of doing an update on the maybe some more about Nick Reiner and the Reiners case, maybe more on D4VD, and oh Val, glad you were listening. And how long have you been listening, or have you just got here? I was wondering if I'd see you show up, and I'm really glad you turned up. I'm really happy to see you. And I know it's a difficult topic and it's a really tough one, but I'm glad you made it. As always, I'm really happy to see you. It's always such a nice lift seeing you in the live. And yeah, it's 3 hours long. It's nothing like, you know, this feels exhausting, but it's nothing like the ones that we used to do on your channel, is it? You know, when we used to go for like 9 hours and crazy lengths of time like that, where we just do it all night, you know. And it goes by like a you know, like a flash, you know what I mean? Like it always did with you anyway, you know. I've been here for a while, wasn't able to chat before. Oh, that's totally fine. I'm glad you've been watching. And what do you think of the live? Have you got any questions or anything like that before we wrap up? And I'm so glad you could make it and let me know you were watching. Like you really inspire me so much. I know I always say this, but I can't say it enough. Like I'm really happy with, you know, how my last live did, the D4VD David live. You know, it's got like over 400 views, and I've only ever gotten those numbers a couple of times before, and I'm really happy with the way things are going. And like I can't thank anyone other than you. You know, like it's been you who's been, you know, giving me the confidence to do this and keep doing it, and the self belief and the motivation and the inspiration to do it. And I like, you know, that it's you know, that, you know, just, you know, you were the one who encouraged me to start doing true crime lives, and like you're still always supporting me on that, and it means a lot, you know. And I really appreciate everything you do. And I yeah, thanks so much for making it, Val, and everyone, you know. And if there's any questions you have about the case, Jimmy Savile, you know, his life, you know, how he got away with it, anything, fire away. I'd love to answer them, or think about them. You know, I'm really happy to do that. But thanks so much for turning up and being here. I'd love to chat with you for a bit afterwards in the DMs if you're able to. I know you've got a lot of stuff on. I know you've got your appointments and things like that, and a lot of other obligations. So whenever you can, you know, I'd love to hear from you there, because it's always fun chatting cases with you and everything else. You're always you're such a nice person to chat with, and I really like you. So yeah. And yeah, like later in the week, I'll be doing more David lives, maybe an update on the Reiners case and Nick Reiner and everything to do with that. And then also, I do want to do the live about the Hutch, the Kinahan and Hutch feud in Ireland. You know, the Regency Hotel shootings in 2016, where there was the boxing weigh-in, where there was, you know, guys went into the hotel, the Regency Hotel, with AK-47s dressed as like armed police, you know, and basically everything like that. Like that's how they were dressed. So like I want to go into that whole feud and how that started between like two of the biggest names in two of the biggest crime families in Irish history. You know what I mean? Two of the most feared and well-known ones, and how that feud, you know, has been going on for 10 years, and how many people, you know, like loads of people have been killed and imprisoned related to it, and it's caused all kinds of stuff, you know, at home in Ireland and abroad. So we'll be discussing the Hutch Kinahan feud and everything like that. So thank you everyone for making it, and it's been a long one, but it's been an important one, I think. So in case I don't see you, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. Take care, everyone.